Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host. The Yamin of Revolution. 5,000 U.S. troops. They trapped y'all. Oh my goodness. Army, Navy, they revolt against Trump. He out of time. Before we get into that, y'all be sure to wipe y'all feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Every day it gets worse.
A U.S. aircraft carrier has now spent 9 months at sea, and military families are raising serious concerns about what sailors are facing on board. Food shortages, moldy showers, broken toilets, and reportedly falling morale. The carrier at the center of the controversy is the USS Abraham Lincoln, currently operating in the Middle East as the war with Iran continues. Around 5,000 sailors and Marines have been serving aboard the carrier for roughly 9 months, and one number stands out. The Lincoln has reportedly spent 208 consecutive days at sea, more than any other U.S. aircraft carrier in the modern era. According to military family members who spoke to MS Now, the crew is exhausted from the long deployment and demanding operational tempo. Families reportedly described long lines for meals, shortages of basic supplies such as soap and toothpaste, broken toilets, mold in showers and laundry facilities that are not working properly. There are also claims of food shortages and a backlog of mail and supplies. The concerns became serious enough that military families confronted Navy leadership this week. According to recordings cited by MS Now, Navy officials acknowledged problems with toilets and said they were working to address shower concerns. They also acknowledged a backlog of food and mail, reportedly because moving supplies from Bahrain to the ship has become more difficult during the war. And this is not the first time food quality aboard the Lincoln has come under scrutiny. Earlier this year, photos reportedly showed sailors being served small portions and unappealing food. That led some members of Congress to call for investigations. The Navy, however, denied that the ships were facing food shortages, saying the USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Tripoli had sufficient food and healthy options for their crews. Now, families are raising another concern: whether prolonged fatigue and poor living conditions could eventually affect safety and performance on board. One family member even claimed that holes had been spotted on the carrier's flight deck, but the Navy's Fifth Fleet spokesperson denied that allegation and said the Lincoln remains fully capable of meeting all mission requirements. The situation also comes after another carrier, the USS Gerald Ford, faced its own quality of life problems during an extended deployment, including repeated toilet failures and a laundry room fire that required repairs in port. For the USS Abraham Lincoln, the key issue now is endurance. The carrier remains in the Middle East, while its sailors continue operating through an unusually long deployment. And as families demand answers, the Navy is insisting that the ship remains operationally capable. But the question being raised is clear: how long can a crew maintain peak performance when the mission keeps going, while basic conditions on board remain a growing concern?
Subscribe to One India and never miss an update.
These people running out of toilet paper. These people running out of food. What the hell is going on with the U.S. military? Trump got to be real careful. The military ain't gonna take too much of this. Congress, they better be careful playing with the U.S. military, man. They waiting to overthrow all the Congress people and arrest them and seize power on behalf of the generals. I'm telling you right now.
Finally happening, our courageous Navy sailors are revolting against Donald Trump and his unlawful war. That's right, our Navy sailors aboard those super carriers in the Middle East have been telling their family members how atrocious their conditions are, how they hate being complicit in war crimes, how they fear they are going to die on these super carriers. And these are
all the sellers saying they don't want to die, bro. They ain't stupid, my nigga. They can't sell. See, it's easy to lie to us. They know what's going on, nigga. They know exactly what's going on. They know about the ass kicking that's going on. Ain't no make believe. Now the parents can hear it in the voices. The wives can hear the stress in the husbands. This ain't no joke. Hell no. This is what the army needs to revolt. Arrest all of the U.S. Congress people, and they got to arrest the generals and the leaders who prosecuted this war. They knew this was war crimes. Remember, they wasted most of our ammunition. Mexico could attack us right now, nigga. We'd be in trouble. That's a fact, bro. Mexico could launch missiles at us. We ain't got no air defense. Yeah, we can blow them up. We got missiles, but they could destroy our cities because we can't defend ourselves. This is not a small thing, bro.
Are carriers that have been out at sea on deployments for record-setting times as morale is at an all-time low. You see, this past week in San Diego,
you better be lucky North Korea is not Mexico, because if North Korea was near us, they would invade the U.S. right now, nigga, and dare the U.S. to use a nuclear weapon, because they use them too. But they would definitely kick our ass for all the threatening. They might invade South Korea at any time now, because we took all the South Korean weapons and shipped them to the Middle East. Taiwan, they definitely scared to death right now. They scared to death. They crying, they praying, they asking China. They say, I'm sorry, we apologize, we didn't mean it. We didn't want no freedom. We never want to separate from you, China. It's too late.
At the Naval Air Station North Island, at an area in there called the Island Club, there were 200 family members who had family on the USS Abraham Lincoln, which has now been deployed for, as of that day, about 258 days, now about 262 days or so it's been deployed. Now, that deployment is very long, but then there was also the USS Gerald Ford that was deployed 326 days, and that left mid to late May from its deployment and came back. Then you had the George H.W. Bush, which has been deployed for about 108, 109 days or so. And because the U.S. has lost all control in the war and is unable to even guarantee its own safety, the George H.W. Bush supercarrier had to go down past the tip of Africa rather than go through the Red Sea because it feared that it would be hit by the Houthis.
These ships, man, this is so embarrassing. These Navy warships were we built to go invade countries, destroy them. They used to brag that one of these ships could destroy a whole country. Yeah, those countries in Africa are Venezuela or something, not Iran. Yeah, with some of those busters in the Middle East who don't fight back. These destroyers and warships, which cost us so much money, can't even go anywhere near the supercarrier. It can't even go nowhere near Iran. What the fuck do we got it for then? Man, this is crazy.
Houthis, isn't that a sign as well that the U.S. has completely lost the war? So you had these family members show up at the Island Club in San Diego on Thursday for an in-person meeting. You had the acting Secretary of the Navy, Hung Cao, was there, and he was there along with other top Navy people. We'll talk about what went down. And these family members confronted the head of our Navy and saying, you know, we know that our family members are suffering from serious mental health issues. They're unable to really even eat appropriate food to get basic nutrition. The showers are all moldy. The living conditions are rancid. The plumbing doesn't work. The toilets don't work. The basic day-to-day living has been awful. By the way, do you remember back several months ago on the Midas Touch Network, we were showing you the food that they were being served on the Abraham Lincoln and the Gerald?
I ate better when I was in prison than these. That's crazy, bro. I had better prison trays than I was soldiers. That's not funny, bro, because these people risking their goddamn life. No, I don't want them out there trying to attack people, but damn it, it's a bunch of youngsters who didn't know no better. This is what they feeding them, bro. That's crazy, man. But on the budget, we're giving them hundreds of millions to feed our soldiers. They stealing all those. They stealing. Where's the food at? They stealing it all, bro. This is a fact.
Gerald Ford.
Where the food at?
Remember we were covering that, and it was like these pieces of meat, like just little tiny nuggets of meat that were hard to even decipher what it was. And then you had Hegseth and everybody in the Trump regime saying, no, that's not true. That's a lie, as though our sailors were lying to their family members. I mean, you had the Trump regime defaming our sailors who have been deployed for these massive periods of time. Remember early on, too, in the Gerald Ford, they had all that issue with the plumbing backed up and the sewage spilled. You had feces everywhere. And then on top of that, there was the fire from the laundry room, although some people believe it's possible that the USS Ford was struck by Iran. But the official story...
You telling these lies. There wasn't no laundry room fire. Iran struck the ship. They need to stop lying, bro.
Maybe even worse, that there was a laundry fire because just the basic nuts and bolts don't work in our Navy anymore under Hegseth and Trump and Hung Cao and all of these idiots. And it spread, and there was like 600 to 1,000 beds were destroyed. People had to sleep on the floor. And remember, it had to dock in Crete, like in Greece, to get fixed. And then the story came out how close it was for all of our sailors, like dying, like they almost all got killed. And then this was covered up. We were covering it right when it happened, that massive fire on the Gerald Ford. And so you had the Gerald Ford deployed for 326 days, which is unheard of. I mean, that's a post-Vietnam record. Now you have the Abraham Lincoln, 262 days or so. And the people, our sailors are suffering. And that's what their family members were saying. And they were saying that their family member sailors who were on these ships are saying, we don't want to be involved in these war crimes. We know that the Trump regime is killing the little girls in Manab. We don't want to be associated with these war crimes of Trump and Netanyahu. That's been a kind of consistent, and people were clapping in the room, and they were yelling at the top naval officers and the acting secretary of Navy. Then on Thursday night, there was also there was like a virtual meeting and virtual call as well. So there was the in-person call at the in-person meeting at the Island Club at that San Diego base. Then there was a virtual meeting, and at the virtual meeting, you had, family members of the 5,000 or so service members, sailors on the Abraham Lincoln, again, reiterating the horrific, putrid conditions. And then there was like this gimmick that the Navy tried to run, that the Trump regime ran. So the family members have very specific issues. Look, the showers don't work. The plumbing doesn't work. They're not getting the mail because the Fifth Fleet port in Bahrain has been destroyed by Iran. So our mail isn't even getting to them. And it's very hard for them to reach out to us. And when we do hear from them, we hear how horrible it is. And then the stunt that the Trump regime tried to pull at these meetings and in the virtual meetings, they were like, okay, we're going to text somebody aboard the ship right now. Oh, they say everything's fine and that what you're hearing from your family members is false. Can you believe that shit? Excuse my language. Can you believe? I mean, I guess you can because it's the Trump regime and they're absolutely horrific. And then what they're trying to dangle over these family members, they're like, well, we are getting ready. The USS Theodore Roosevelt, the USS Teddy Roosevelt, that carrier, we're preparing that. We can't tell you when that's going to replace the Abraham Lincoln, but we're working on it. We're working on it, okay? The earliest, by the way, would be what, December? So it seems like our sailors who are aboard that Abraham Lincoln supercarrier that's right out there, that's part of like the blockade, right? That's when they talk about the blockade, you get it, right? It's right now, it's the George H.W. Bush and it's the Abraham Lincoln. It used to be the Gerald Ford, but that was out 326 days. It had the fire, which almost killed all of our sailors. They had all the issues there. So now it's George H.W. Bush and Lincoln. So now they're saying, okay, well, the Lincoln may leave and it could be replaced by the Teddy Roosevelt, but the Teddy Roosevelt won't be ready. I think it's in Hawaii. I think so. That won't be ready at least until Christmas. So what, they're going to be out there for 400 days? I mean, they're going to be out there for the better part of a year. I mean, this is some sick stuff. I want to give a hat tip to MS Now. They got the scoop. They got the audio leaked to them from the family members who attended the in-person meeting at the Island Club at the San Diego base and the virtual meeting that also happened Thursday night. Can I read from you just a little bit of it? May I? Here's how it's described, and hat tip to MS Now for this scoop. In a combative face-to-face confrontation on Thursday night in San Diego, angry military families challenged the acting Secretary of Navy, Hung Cao, over difficult conditions aboard the USS Lincoln. Among the concerns brought up in this contentious meeting, there was that meeting, then the virtual meeting, the sailors' mental health, safety on deck, a lack of supplies, food shortages, water contamination, and disruptions in the mail system, which have caused many care packages en route to the ship to be lost in transit for months. The fact that family members aren't able to see their family and they've been gone so long, they've had children born and big life developments. You have lots of people, again, don't want to be associated with the war crimes that are taking place. And these are things that were raised to Hung Cao. 200 families attended in person. Then there was many more on the virtual meeting. At times, spouses of sailors of the ships were in tears, asking the Navy leaders what was being done to address mental health issues, exhaustion. One parent said her daughter feels that she is never going to come home and believes she's going to die on the ship. One woman questioned the mission and said she found it difficult to be proud of her sailor when she believed the military was killing innocent civilians. And her sailor, her husband, who's a sailor on the Abraham Lincoln supercarrier, expressed guilt about what he was doing. Her comment was met with applause from the audience. You had Vice Admiral Joseph Cahill, Vice Admiral Douglas Verissimo, and top commanders for the Naval Surface Forces were there, and they were just making the family members feel even worse about it. And they were like,
the U.S. Trump wanted the Iranians to sink that ship and kill those 5,000 troops on there so they can declare war, say they got to use nuclear weapons, because they really want to use nuclear weapons because too many people on this planet. They want to depopulate us. Never forget that. But the Iranians refused to do it. So they just decommissioned the ship, hit it where it started fire. They absolutely want to use these people. These people still is trapped. The Israelis might sink this ship and blame it on the Iranians. These people know they sitting ducks.
Like, oh, well, you know what? This is what it means to be an American. This is what it means to be a patriot. This is what Donald Trump and Hegseth want them to do. So they got to do what Trump and Hegseth say they need to do. One spouse said they have a baby at home who was born during the USS Abraham Lincoln's deployment. My husband has gotten no time with her. We have friends that are on this boat as well. They've yet to meet their children. And I just think like a lot of us are kind of confused and just frustrated right now. We're in limbo. We have no date about when they're going to come home. And then those commanders were like, I wish we could help you, but there's really nothing we can do right now. There's also issues about exhaustion, low morale, mental health of the sailors and Marines as the war now reaches its 23rd week. Many in the virtual town hall question what mental health resources are available. The military leaders at this meeting acknowledged that there had been a stubborn clog that caused many of the toilets in a certain zone of the ship not to work for an extended period of time, but maintained that sailors on the ship had been trained to address the plumbing issues. By the way, in the USS Gerald Ford, the one that has departed in May. But remember all of those plumbing issues right around when the war was launched by Trump and Netanyahu? There was feces all over the floor. There was piss all over the floor and toilet water all over the floor. These supercarriers have not received the maintenance that they need under the Trump regime. It's really horrible stuff. Mold in the showers. It's not appealing for any of us. Difficult ventilation systems on the ship. Unique supply chain challenges taking place, which is causing food shortages because Iran has been striking those ports like Bahrain and other areas. So we can't get the food from the Fifth Fleet port onto the ships. And because our ships are sitting ducks out there and just doing the blockade, as Trump calls it, there's no way to get them. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. The Red Sea is closed, right? That's why the George H.W. Bush had to go around Africa. So that's why you can't get food to the ships, because we don't have control over anything, or because Iran won the war. Like we all get that, right? There was this huge backlog of food. So you have all of that taking place, okay? I showed you the photos going back to the issues with the Gerald Ford. I showed you the food issues, right, with the Abraham Lincoln. I mean, look at that. I don't even know what this is. This is, and then our military had the audacity to say, no, that's not a real photo. Those are lies. Like what, our sailors are liars? No, they're telling the truth. What are you talking about? Then there was the laundry room fire that required basically our service members to sleep on the floor. They all lost it. But even worse than the fact that they didn't have beds, they don't have sheets, it all got burned. You saw the footage that our military was trying to cover up, right? I think we have the footage that came in from foreign governments had to post it. Like this came in from Russia and other places, but it's authentic, this photo. I wouldn't show you videos that aren't authentic. This is what it looked like, just so you can see. Now, a few points I want to bring up right now. You had Pete Hegseth. What is he repeatedly saying about how he's going to improve morale? He goes, those flyovers that we're doing, when we fly our planes really low, how like they do like those jets that fly right over the water and like looks like they're going to kill the people on the beach, which like they go, yeah, lethality. That's what Pete Hegseth. We're going to keep doing the flyovers until we improve morale. Here, play this clip.
The warrior ethos of our department, again, spirit. And I will note, the flyovers will indeed continue until morale improves. But that's also spirit. Parades, 250, flyovers, the American people seeing and feeling their military in ways they have not in the past. That's spirit.
And then you have Hung Kao, who has the acting Secretary of Navy, who says the president is always 5 steps ahead of the Iranians. No, you can't even get our sailors food. The toilet bowls are clogged with feces, and there's feces all over the floor. Our sailors are suffering because you can't even give them the most basic supplies. There's mold, the showers don't work. So if you can't do the basics, right, you are, no wonder you've run out of munitions, right? Like you've seen me do lots of coverage over the past several days about the munition issue, right? That the U.S. ran out of Patriot interceptors. It ran out of THAAD interceptors. We've run out of SM-2, 3, and 6, SM-6, anti-ballistics on the Navy destroyers. We don't have those. The ATACMS, the HIMARS, the offensive weapons, we ran out of those. The Arab nations that we supply these weapons to, they've pretty much run out of those as well. You have that. And now you have the issue on the ships where morale's at an all-time low, where the sailors aren't even getting food. Think about that. And so I showed you what Hung Kao said there.
Congratulations on that.
We love that. Secretary, I know you don't want to get ahead of the Commander-in-Chief and the Secretary of War here, but there are a lot of Americans who watch the big weekend show. Yeah. And every weekend we say tensions are rising. Now there's a memorandum. Now there's a ceasefire. Maybe it's not a ceasefire. We read some truth socials from the president. And there are some Americans who are a little confused as to where we are now. They don't know if their gas prices are going to go up or go down. What can you say to the American people who are watching? They believe in the president. president, but they're sometimes a little confused at all the steps and all the maneuvering going on.
Well, the enemy has a vote, but here's the thing: the president's always 5 steps ahead of him, and we can be the best friends in the world or the worst enemy. And look what's happening down in Venezuela. We're bringing aid and support to the people of Venezuela, and we're patrolling seas all around the world, including South China Sea, as well as in Europe, the Mediterranean, the Gulf. We're there. We're there to do whatever the president needs.
And Hung Kao now says we need 350 more ships. That's why we are pushing for $1.5 trillion, because Donald Trump wants to now build Trump-class battleships that'll cost close to $1 trillion when all is said and done. The budget total for the military Trump wants is $1.5 trillion. But in this day and age with drones, unmanned submersives, anti-drone technology, Trump wants to build battleships because he likes the aesthetic. He likes the way he doesn't like the way stealth looks. He doesn't like the way aircraft carriers looks, but he likes the way battleships look between World War I and World War II. So he wants to spend like $1 trillion on Trump battleships. This is where the money's going, by the way. In addition to it's why our debt is skyrocketing, and this could be going to like healthcare and things. This is what it's going to. And he can't even get food to our sailors in an active combat zone right now. So what the hell are you doing with your battleships? Here's what Hung Kao said. Here, play this clip.
Before. We fought 20 years of war, and the Navy was very involved, but it wasn't always the boats that we were thinking about. Now that's been the top line. We're in littoral warfare, brown water warfare, using ships in ways that maybe we haven't in the last couple of decades. Where is the Navy when it comes to fighting a war like this?
I mean, we're always ready. We're always on deployment all the time. But right now we need 350 ships. And that's exactly why the president is pushing for this $1.5 trillion budget so we can build the ships we need. Because ships like the USS, Gerald Ford and the entire strike group was extended till 11 months on deployment because we didn't have enough ships to backfill them. And that's why we need these ships out there. But I tell you what, the strength of our Navy and Marine Corps is the sailors and Marines that are manning our ships and bases, and they're getting things done.
I know, it's absolutely horrific, right? Absolutely. And then on Wednesday, before this meeting took place, Hung Kao released the following memo. I kid you not, this is real. Acting Secretary of the Navy's warrior ethos. This went to all Navy. Everybody got this in the Navy. The bedrock of the Navy and Marine Corps is our warrior ethos, and its direct relationship to good order and discipline forge these principles into the foundation of our lethality as a naval force. What the hell word salad does that even mean? We must recognize the urgency for an immediate reevaluation of our attention to basic military standards, appearance, and professionalism across the department. So Hegseth, Hung Kao, and Trump are now attacking our sailors and saying that they don't meet the basic standards and professionalism. Actually, they do. How dare you say that about our service members? You want to talk about basic professionalism? How about you get our service members food? How about you get them functioning toilets and functioning showers? How about you deliver their damn mail, you traitors? What the hell are you talking about? How about we start with getting food in their tummies? Like, how about we start with the basics, okay? And how about we have toilets that don't explode on these ships, okay? This is, I kid you not, this is the message. They're attacking our troops with everything going on. They're blaming our troops right now. Trump, Hegseth, Hung Kao. Well, how else would you read this? The services must prioritize warfighters remaining physically and mentally fit, and shall do so by allotting the time and resources for them to train accordingly. Navy and Marine Corps culture will drive the success of this outcome because it is the essence of how we fight, win, and accomplish impossible tasks. To build culture, it starts with physical appearance and personal comportment every single day. A squared-away Marine exudes discipline, preparedness, and lethality. A squared-away sailor displays confidence, focus, and precision. Service culture is where it starts. This includes how we act online or on social media. Effective immediately, every sailor and Marine shall ensure their every action aligns towards these behaviors. We are in the business of war fighting, and we must get at this with urgency. You see what the veiled threat is right there? Don't post about how horrible we're treating you, because that would be unprofessional. And you would not be showing the warrior ethos and lethality by telling your family members that you are suffering aboard these carriers. How else would you read that? This is what it says. Our nation relies on the Department of War to accomplish its mission of projecting power and deterring aggression. During my time serving as your undersecretary and now as acting secretary, I periodically observe departures from the expected high standards for our force or a lack of persistent vigilance. We must take a round turn in areas such as military bearing, physical fitness and appearance, deportment, haircuts, and wear of the uniform. Atrophy of the little things erodes our heritage and undermines our trust. You're not even giving them food. You're not giving our sailors working showers. You're not giving them working toilets. You're not delivering their damn mail. And you've kept them out on sea. In the Gerald Ford example, 326 days. In the example of the Lincoln, 262 days. How dare you attack their professionalism? You want to see Donald Trump at night doing drone port posts and AI images of himself with General MacArthur and Patton, and then you want to lecture about professionalism? No, our service members are damn professional. It's all of you in leadership who behave like buffoons. We must get back to the basics of professionalism. As iron sharpens iron, we need to hold each other accountable. This is the memo that was sent out. Our allies, adversaries, and the public can gauge our readiness within 10 seconds of an interaction. So we must strive to not only be the most lethal when preparing for combat, but also look the part every day. What's this weird obsession with they look the part? You know who doesn't look the part? You all. By saying look the part, y'all look like a bunch of phonies. And you know who can gauge our lack of professionalism in 10 seconds? Iran, our allies, our enemies, our adversaries. They can all do it, right? They all can see it. They all can see that you all lack professionalism. And how dare you attack our troops on the issue of professionalism? Yeah. Awful people. Awful, awful people. Anyway, I hope I did that justice for our sailors and their families. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 7 million subscribers. Thanks so much for watching. Did you get a copy of WTF America, the book I wrote with my brothers? Pre-order it now if you can.
Iran has just laid down a brutal set of new conditions for the deranged occupant of the White House to reopen the critical Strait of Hormuz. Iranian Foreign Minister Sayyid Abbas Araghchi has issued a hard-hitting statement repeating his country's resolve to not surrender to the US. This comes directly on the heels of a series of deeply embarrassing admissions from the Trump administration. Today, Trump's Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, practically conceded defeat against Iran over the strategic waterway, while the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, dropped desperate hints that the US was frantically hunting for an off-ramp to escape this humiliating conflict. Meanwhile, the fractures inside Europe are breaking wide open. Spain has struck back fiercely at Italy, announcing retaliatory counter-immigration measures targeting Italian nationals visiting the country. This stunning collapse of Western leverage and regional alliances will be the broad focus of our video tonight. But that is not all. Also in this video, we bring you a must-see encounter where a sharp young man from Iceland steps up to show Rabbi Shmuley his real worth with a powerful and uncompromising anti-Israeli views. So please stay tuned. For months, Trump believed his maximum pressure campaign would force the Islamic Republic into submission. But today, the tables have completely turned. And why are we not surprised? In a brilliant geopolitical counter move, Iran has effectively checkmated Donald Trump by setting down an unyielding, non-negotiable term sheet to reopen the world's most critical energy choke point. Tehran isn't just dictating the future flow of global oil. They are actually drawing a hard, defiant line in the sand, proving that the rules of engagement in the Persian Gulf are no longer being written by the White House. To understand exactly how Iran has shifted the leverage and backed Washington into a diplomatic corner, listen directly to Iranian Foreign Minister Sayyid Abbas Araghchi. English translation and voiceover done by 15-year-old Ruefi.
However, determining this path between Iran and Oman does not necessarily mean reopening the Strait of Hormuz, because it is subject to other conditions as well. And all instances of violations of the Memorandum of Understanding committed by the United States must be compensated one by one, and all of them must be resolved so that the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz can take place based on the discretion of the Supreme National Security Council. I explicitly state that the current situation is the result of the violation of the Memorandum of Understanding by the United States. Regarding the Strait of Hormuz, the text of the Memorandum of Understanding, specifically Clause 5, which pertains to the Strait, is completely clear. It states that Iran will make arrangements so that the Strait of Hormuz can be reopened. We were in the process of carrying this out. According to Clause 5, within 1 month, traffic was supposed to return to pre-war conditions and pre-war levels, and we were implementing this. Nearly 2 weeks into the implementation of the memorandum, traffic had reached approximately 60% of pre-war levels and was expanding further, but the Americans came and created new routes, aimed, in my view, at questioning or undermining Iran's management over the Strait of Hormuz. It was repeatedly warned that stated that your actions, opening new routes, opening new corridors, and creating new arrangements, are contrary to the Memorandum of Understanding. Well, they insisted on directing ships towards other routes rather than the route specified by Iran. And as a result, we ended up in the conditions we face today. In any case, we will not tolerate anyone violating the Memorandum of Understanding without accountability or attempting to question Iran's management, sovereignty, and authority over the Strait of Hormuz.
So what are these conditions? First, Iran's military demands. They include the lifting of the naval blockade. Iran wants the US to immediately end its maritime and aerial blockade of Iranian ports. The Islamic Republic then wants the US military to withdraw forces from the region. It says that the US military must completely withdraw its naval and air forces from the waters and regions surrounding Iran. The US must permanently end all military actions against Iran and its regional allies, including factions in Lebanon, Palestine, Yemen, and Iraq, and seize all threats against the country. Then there are financial and economic demands under which the US must permanently remove all economic and energy export sanctions imposed on Iran. The Trump administration must also pay war reparations. How? That's not Iran's headache. Iran wants the US to pay financial compensation for the widespread infrastructural and economic damages caused during the conflict. The Islamic Republic also wants the US to fully unfreeze and release all Iranian financial assets currently blocked in international accounts. Iran has also maintained its intention to charge fees. Watch this short broadcast by Al Jazeera.
Now, before the war, around 140 ships a day streamed through this waterway, and they were using routes that were quite far from both of the coasts. Now, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards has restricted traffic since April, and they've been ordering vessels to take the route around Larak Island towards the north. They also say that this area is hazardous, with military analysts saying there's likely to be sea mines in that area. Now, Iran says reopening the strait depends on the US ending its blockade there. It's been building military presence there for months, and it currently has 2 carrier strike groups in that area. In the past 24 hours, CENTCOM says it's been enforcing the blockade, and it's also redirected 48 commercial vessels, disabled 2 and also boarded 2. Now, reports suggest that as part of its talks with Oman, Iran wants to start charging fees. Now, reports say that's around 5 to 7% of the cargo value, and that's in order to use it for war reparations. Oman has suggested 3% of voluntary payments, and the US wants 0 fees. In the US, President Trump is under growing political pressure. Polls suggest most voters oppose the war ahead of the midterm elections in November. Months of US strikes have failed to loosen Iran's grip on the strait. And in Yemen, the Ansar Allah Houthis have been blockading the Bab el-Mandeb, and that's over there on the Red Sea. And that's increasing the strain on global shipping and oil prices. While Oman and Iran finalize their deal to manage this strategic waterway, regional powers are hoping to bring Tehran and Washington back to that negotiating table in order to end the war.
Trump's deputy, J.D. Vance, has now sensationally claimed that Iran told him that it will not charge fees.
You see some people within the Iranian system, of course, talk about tolling. The Iranians have told us they have no plans to toll the Strait of Hormuz. But again, we're going to see what actions actually happen. What's been going on for the past week or so, we're talking to the Iranians, of course. We're trying to maximize the amount of oil and gas that are coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. That's the thing that we're most focused on right now. And you see, I think, oil prices dipping around $80 a barrel today, sometimes a little bit lower. So we're just trying to make sure that we get what we need.
It seems Vance too has gone full Delulu. Just like his boss, he has traded reality for an alternate universe and has now started interacting with completely imaginary Iranian figures. It's no longer just a diplomatic misstep. It's a full-blown political hallucination. And if this wasn't enough, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, has privately urged top advisors to find an off-ramp from the conflict with Iran, signaling that the administration faces severe strategic limitations. According to the CNN, this behind-the-scenes push for an exit strategy indicates that Washington is struggling to sustain its current escalation and may face a difficult geopolitical retreat. What an utter humiliation for the world's most powerful military.
We've speculated the strait will never go back to being the way it was before. What would you say?
I think they're saying that in a doomsday sort of way. I would say it in another way. The strait is never going back to the way it was because the Iranians have used or tried to use it as a choke point. What we are going to see over the next 2 years, the strait's going to become irrelevant. It is going to become just another body of water. And I would say that more than 50 or 70% of the energy that moves through the strait now is going to go through underground pipelines.
Such is the chaos in the Trump administration over Iran that even hardcore proponents of war have now started to question the US president's strategy. Listen to John Bolton on Fox News here.
Ambassador Bolton, this news about looking for an off-ramp, is that what is needed right now?
Well, I'd be cautious about exactly what Kane is looking for. He may just be looking for alternatives to the utter vacuum in strategy that we now see. That the on-again, off-again ceasefire, memorandum of understanding, threats of retaliation have done nothing for the past several months to advance whatever Trump's objective is, which still has not been made clear.
Meanwhile, Iran has continued to target ships that it deems are in violation of its embargo in the Strait of Hormuz. A report by Reuters news agency today said that the United Arab Emirates has condemned what it said was an Iranian attack on a carrier linked to its state oil company as it passed through the Strait of Hormuz, accusing the Islamic Republic of acts of piracy. State news agency WAM initially quoted the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, or ADNOC, as saying one of its vessels had been targeted by a missile early on Saturday and that the situation was under control. Then Trump has his own headache in Michigan as he struggles to stop the juggernaut of Abdul El-Sayed. Trump and his minions have tried their best to mock his Muslim identity, but this isn't affecting the charismatic Senate nominee. First, watch how he reacted when a Sky News reporter asked him to react to Trump's expletive-laden diatribe.
And he says, if you pardon the language, you're full of shit. What do you say to that?
At least I don't let mine go in the middle of the Oval Office.
Abdul, how are you doing? I'm good. I'm from Sky News in the UK. Nice to meet you. James Matthews. Right very, very quick, one question. Donald Trump says that Donald Trump seems to think you're a gift for the Republican Party. What do you say to that?
Good to meet you.
Abdul, Donald Trump seems
Nice
to think
to
you're
meet
a
you,
gift to the Republican Party. What do you say to that?
I'm a gift to the state of Michigan, God willing, and
how much ammunition does America have? How many interceptors do we have for our own defense, both of our allies and ourselves in the Middle East? And President Trump tried to really reinforce people that, yeah, you know what? Don't even worry about that.
Because we need more all the time. I mean, we need more. We have certain types of munitions that are very powerful, that we have virtual unlimited supply. We have others where it's a little bit tighter, and we're getting them in on a daily basis. As you know, our defense companies are building more plants right now than at any point in history. They're building plants for the Patriots, for the Tomahawks, for everything. But we have certain types of munitions, which are very, they may not be as accurate. They may not be, they're not as elite. We have elite too, but we're watching that very closely. But we have certain types which are very powerful and very good, and we have an unlimited supply. But we're in very good shape. We have literally massive amounts of ammunition.
He tries to give people this confidence. Say, hey, you know what? Don't worry about it. We're making stuff all the time. Yeah, we'd like to have a little bit more. We're kind of low on some stuff, but don't worry about it because we're building all these plants more than we ever have before, which is nonsense, obviously. There was this little thing called World War II. Maybe you heard about it, where we completely transitioned from a peacetime economy to a wartime economy. And there was massive expansion of the industrial sector for wartime. So not thinking that you're anywhere near that. But that aside, in a new plant equals years from now, 3 to 5 years from now, before one missile comes off of any kind of a factory floor. So you can expand a little bit. You can marginally increase that in the meantime, and I'm sure they are doing. But you're talking about a new plant. I mean, you need everything from the skilled labor to the supply chains to the obviously the physical tools that are necessary to make these things. And I mean, back on that personnel, we're talking like rocket scientists people. You're talking extremely educated people, and there just aren't a lot of those to get. So that is one of the bigger constraints, is to have the people skilled enough to operate these things. That takes time to make too. So forget about that. That has no impact on this war at all, and it won't. Second thing is, he said, but we have other ammunition. And he even admits it's a little bit less effective. It's a lot less effective. It's also, and there is plenty of it, by the way. There's lots of those other kinds of, like we've talked about them before, the JDAMs, the SDB, small diameter bombs, and a number of other kinds of offensive weaponry that we have. We certainly do have a lot of those, but they are less effective. Absolutely. And almost all of them, some can be fired from launchers, but the majority of them have to be fired from fighter aircraft and for bombers, et cetera. And so you have to get a lot closer to the target, which is going to put you at increased risk of air defense from the Iranian side. And even aside from that risk, you would literally start wearing out your planes, wearing out your crews, and to try to get that done on top of that other risk. And then you're still not going to be able to get very far in, because if you really want to hit targets in the depth of the country, you're going to have to fly over the country. You're going to have to fly over with these refueling tankers over Iranian territory, and you just can't do that. And of course, we showed you, I think, a couple of days ago that at least at the time, it was like 30 of these refueling tankers on the airfield at in Israel, at one airfield in there. And believe me, if you start going into an accepted war and where you're reliant on those, the enemy, all they've got to do is take out the refueling tankers. And then it's extremely difficult for you to conduct any kind of operations because of the range of these fighters that are mostly coming off, or many of them anyway, are coming off aircraft carrier decks hundreds of miles out into the sea. So without these refueling tankers, they can't get to the target and safely get back. So that's the real Achilles heel, even aside from the ammunition not working. So when he says, yeah, we got plenty of ammo, that's technically true, but it's not going to do anything to Iran that our better and bigger and longer range stuff didn't do either. So in that, he unwittingly admitted we cannot militarily defeat Iran. That's fact. Now, that fact was, you'd never know that from listening to a lot of the war lusters and the war advocates and the war cheerleaders. And listen, based on some of the things we're seeing here, I'm going to show you some of the examples of here and some other information I'm getting from some sources that have access to downrange. Is starting to look again, worried about this after we didn't fight last weekend, that the pressure would be too high on President Trump. And it's looking like he's again given serious consideration to launching one more big strike. And he's getting lots of pushback in that area, or lots of shoving toward that direction, as this retired lieutenant commander says here.
I'm concerned that Iran is trying to play loosey with the football here, because their real objective is to drag this out as long as they can into the midterms. But what it really comes down to is the fact that President Trump could inflict tremendous damage on Iran if he decides to. It's there. But, you know, I know that he would rather not if we can have a deal. I imagine this is Iran's last chance.
Yeah, he's echoing President Trump there. So he's trying to take his language and say, yeah, this is your last chance for Iran. So do it. Yeah, you can bring enormous damage, and that's going to cause Iran. Now, listen, to be clear, we still have a number of long-range cruise missiles, JASSMs, Tomahawks, and all the other categories that President Trump mentioned. That's a fact. So it is a fact that we could do. He's right on that one point, that we could bring a lot of damage on the surface in Iran. We could blow up all kinds of buildings and kill people, but not things that are militarily significant for control of the Strait of Hormuz. We told you before, that's those missile cities. You can't get underneath the Granite Mountains. Nothing that we did in the first 2 rounds of fighting did, and nothing will in any future subsequent rounds. You just aren't going to get through a Granite Mountain. It's as simple as that. But that doesn't mean you can't try. And this idea, again, they always want to have, like Stoltenberg was lying a minute ago, these people want to say, oh, yeah, you know, to the American people. Because understand this, let's be clear on this. That video and all the ones I'm about to show you are all designed to deceive you, the American people, to make you think that, one, the war can be won, that it can be successful, and number two, that it has to be. We have to fight this because those darn Iranians, you can't trust a thing they say. In fact, he uses the Lucy in the football situation, which is that's a real gem there. Because you want to talk about who keeps saying, yeah, we have a deal, and then undoes it. The implication being that it's Iran. Who had a negotiated deal from one state to another state in 2018, and which state pulled the football out from under them, or pulled the rug out from under them? If you want to use a different analogy, that would be our side. That would be President Trump got out of the JCPOA. Who said that we were negotiating an end to their nuclear weapons program in 2025, and then pulled the diplomatic ball out of the way, and then the other side fell down and we went to war? Who did the same thing in 2026? Who did the same thing in the memorandum of understanding that says, hell, here it is. We signed this paragraph 1 where Israel will leave Lebanon. They didn't. Here's a paragraph 5 where we said that Iran and Oman would control the Strait of Hormuz, and then we inserted ourselves into it. Who was that again? So you want to talk about who's loosey and who's pulling the ball around? You might want to flip that around. I guarantee you the Iranian side is thinking that. And then that Iran's intent is to just drag this out. They want to go to the midterms or something. No, they don't want to drag it out. They want it to be over. But what their absolute unwavering objective is control the Strait of Hormuz. They have said openly this past week, again, they've been repeating it for a long time, they will never go back to the world that existed before 28 February. It will never be just open again. no matter what consequence or price they have to pay. That is their objective. See, now the reason why they want to lie and tell you it's something else, because if it's just to drag it out, well, there's no actual identifiable objective there. So just dragging it out means, well, then we can just stop dragging it out, and then that will be it. So we'll succeed. But if they honestly tell you that their objective is to hold the Strait of Hormuz, and then they see that, and here's what they got to do it with. There's like 30 of these, 30 something spread throughout the country, and quite a few other things. And you can see, oh, snap, we can't get rid of that. So if they're honest and tell you what the actual objective is and what their means of handling it are, then you can see the futility of it. So they're going to lie to you and tell you that. He's not the only one. KT McFarland, who used to be in the national security for, I want to say, Bush, she was a lot of those that lied during the 2003 war with Iraq. So she's got some interesting history there. She's going to try to convince Trump again that the Iranian side is on their last legs.
The president said, we're winning this war. Maybe not in the media, but if you look at the price of oil, for example, about $80 a barrel, doesn't matter if there's a ceasefire or no ceasefire, oil's about there. The United States is now the world's largest exporter
right there?
of oil, crude oil. Look at the price of oil. Look at the price of oil.
So look, you want to say that we're winning the war, and your example is the price of oil? She goes, yeah, we're actually winning this. So not in the media, she says, but in the reality, we're winning the war. And you want to go to the paper price of oil, which President Trump is infamous for manipulating to keep it artificially low, has nothing to do with the actual issues on the ground. Just wanted to point that out. You can continue playing.
For example, about $80 a barrel. Doesn't matter if there's a ceasefire or no ceasefire. Oil's about there. The United States is now the world's largest exporter of oil, crude oil, refined oil, liquefied natural gas.
Okay, the reason why we're exporting all this is because we're drawing down our strategic petroleum reserve. You understand that? You understand the significance of that? She's saying that like that's a good thing, and somehow that means we're winning the war. I don't know how she ties those things together, but that is a big negative for us because that is dwindling our emergency reserves, both for our military and for our economy, in the event that beyond this, there's any other oil restriction and a loss of supply. So we are literally playing with our futures by this, and again, has nothing to do with this war. I digress. Please continue.
Dan, take a look on her face. She looks surprised at what you just said. I don't know.
she shouldn't be. That's a good one. Yeah, that is. But she also has this really arrogant look on her face, like, of course this is the case, and nothing she said so far is right. But let's see if she has anything better to say.
Largely as a result of what's happened in the Iran war, and on the other side of the equation. Marcus, Iran is just a basket case economically. Their currency is collapsing. Their inflation is 100, 200%. They're getting no income in. And while we're having all these negotiations, it's either on or off or on or off. The one thing that's remained is the blockade. Iran is getting no ships in or out of Iran. They're not exporting any oil, and the sanctions remain. So they're bleeding out.
They're bleeding out. Wow. So President Trump, man, you need to push harder. Obviously, all these people are talking because they know President Trump is watching this stuff. And man, they're bleeding out. So all you got, this harkens back to Jack Keane when he was talking early in the war in January, that they're so weak now. They're on their last legs. They're going to fall at any time. They've never been weaker, and all the 47, all that stuff. Remember that? That was exposed to have been a hogwash. So now then, this idea that they're bleeding out. To be clear, both on our show here, Professor Morandi, and just a couple of days ago, or maybe yesterday, Nima Al-Horshid, both acknowledged, yes, the blockade is definitely hurting Iran. Yes, the inflation is definitely high. There are genuine problems throughout the country. But what they also said, which Alistair Crook has said on our show for months, none of that matters because to Iran, this is an existential crisis, a literal existential crisis for the existence of their state. And there is no price that they won't pay. Again, hearkening back to how the Russian population is not going to collapse because the Ukraine side wants to make it hard on them. Just like the Ukraine side hasn't collapsed because Russia has made it profoundly hard on them for all these years. Pressure and the pain alone are not going to give Russia the victory. They're going to have to go until they have the physical destruction, and there's no longer the capacity, no matter how bold or how patriotic or how heroic the Ukrainian people are. Eventually, that's not going to matter because they're going to not have the wherewithal to fight. That is never going to happen in the Iran side, because number one, you have no ground force, so you can't do anything on the ground, unlike what the Russians have. They have a ground component that is literally putting pressure on the Ukrainian cities, and they have the air power and the drones and all that. There is no such analogy here. We're running low on ammunition, so we can't keep this pace up much longer. And she's also wrong that they're not exporting anything. They're not exporting anything through our blockade, at least not anything of any substance. But there's this thing called the Caspian Sea. I don't know if you've heard about it. They can export stuff up there, a lot of it to Russia itself. And I think it's like 8 different countries that they have land borders with. And yeah, they are transporting stuff. And oil isn't their only commodity. So they actually do have an economy outside of that. And oil is a big part, and it's definitely causing problems. It is not going to cause them to collapse. That's what you need to understand. Iran has everything they need to self-sustain. They have obviously all the petroleum products that they need to be able to conduct business. They have all the food they need. They have all the water they need. And most of their stuff is self-contained, their economy, but they have land borders that they can do stuff. So even though it'll hurt, they can go indefinitely, as they did for 8 years during the Iran-Iraq war. We have some experience with that. So she is complete nonsense there, yet she's wanting to push President Trump in a direction to go back to full war. And of course, who is the biggest cheerleader for that of all, now that Lindsey Graham is dead? And that falls to the shoulders, the happy deciding of Jack Keane.
Any deal include Iran paid for?
No, absolutely not. There should be no tolls, no fees, no insurance guarantees. And also, there should be no management or oversight of it. I mean, we should go back to pre-February 28th. The Straits of Hormuz was regarded as freedom of navigation and international waterways. No country had oversight of it. No one decided when ships would move through it. If we want to establish an inbound and outbound lanes, that seems to be fine. I don't think there's any objections to that. But anything beyond that is not what we should be negotiating. We all know what Iran wants. They believe there's a strategic asset. I'm telling you, they think this now has more leverage than the development and growth of a nuclear weapon. So the United States has to go into this clearly knowing full well, let's give this a try. But if the Iranians don't cooperate here, then we have to go back to major combat operations.
Well, there you have it. That's the key there. He gave away the secret. He wants to go back to full combat operations, even though we have told you it's been released and leaked in all the major publications. President Trump himself acknowledged that we're running low on those things, on the key weapon systems. And now we're going to have to rely on second tier things that are less capable and more costly to use and at a higher risk. And yet he wants to do it anyway. It is crazy. I mean, it is insane to argue for that, given the top of defensive fortifications that the Iranian side has, their ability to absorb all of these strikes and their ability to sustain themselves independently, indefinitely, and our very limited ability with all these weapons. And understand also, even aside from this, for crying out loud, you are burning through nearly all of our key weapon systems, offensive and defensive, on a war that should never have been fought, that has nothing to do with American national security, depleting our capabilities if we do get into a war that we don't choose, that is for our national security and for our existential fight if we get into one. Does nobody think about that? I believe that we are so arrogant and presumptuous that we think no one would ever do that to us, even if we burn all of our ammunition here on a stupid thing like this and make ourselves literally defenseless, because other than great video, nobody gives a damn how many aircraft carriers you have, how many F-16s you have, how many F-22s, F-35s, B-1s, B-2s, you name it, all this really flashy stuff. No one cares how many of those you have if you don't have a missile to put in it. If you don't have any defense missiles to even make it hard for the other side. And of course, we don't have a fraction of the drones that some of these other potential countries that we could go against have. We're nearly defenseless there. We're way behind where the Ukraine side is. And you want to press ahead. You are literally playing Russian roulette with our national security by making these absurd claims.
A journalist and political analyst to discuss what is going on now in the Middle East. So thank you for coming back on the program. My pleasure again. With you, it's always a pleasure. Thank you. And there's a lot of things happening at the moment. We're seeing some indications of a willingness to escalate or at least go on the offensive. And at the same time, we're seeing some diplomatic developments. Usually, well, of course, the US is making similar threats about possibly doing a major strike on Iran. Trump just said we'll see within the next 48 hours. But also, the Iranians seem to be more willing to go on the offensive as opposed to only responding to what the Americans are doing. At the same time, though, there's some diplomatic developments going on between Iran and Oman, and it's unclear how the U.S. will respond to this. I was wondering, how are you interpreting the situation?
Well, I'm deep into it, Glenn. In fact, I finished writing a column a little while ago. Be out in Russia tonight, talking about the dead cat MOU. You know that cat that was it dead? Was it alive? Was in coma? Apparently, it's another resuscitation in progress. And against all odds, in fact, I tried to have a little bit of poetic license with it. And in full Odyssey mode, I compared the almost dead MOU cat as a voyager in a raft in the middle of an ocean in revolt under the wrath of Poseidon, but he was still resisting. So this is what it is at the moment, and based on facts. Well, the most important fact is that the diplomatic channel is being revived actively, and it involves a lot of players. As our audience knows, Pakistan is the key mediator between Iran and US. But of course, there's also help and confabulations, let's put it this way, with Oman, with Qatar, with Saudi Arabia, the Turks dropping on and off. And of course, behind all of them is China. China wants a peaceful resolution of this war. And this, in fact, what we have now is a no war, no peace situation, which is the last thing that the Chinese want. The Chinese are absolutely sticklers for stability, continuity, predictability. And this involves one of their key strategic allies across Eurasia. So this diplomatic channel, which we can describe as Beijing, Islamabad, Tehran, is very, very active. Very important because both are New Silk Road's Belt and Road Initiative partners. In the case of Pakistan, of course, the most important BRI projects is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And with Iran, China has on top of it a strategic partnership, a 25-year deal signed, sealed, delivered, ongoing, $400 billion energy and infrastructure. And of course, they are the two key partners linking South Asia to West Asia for China. So how is this manifesting itself in practice? And that's when the complication of the whole thing becomes visible. Do you know who's arriving in Islamabad tomorrow, Glenn? Arakshi, on an official visit. He got an open invitation earlier this week from Ishaq Dar, the Pakistani foreign minister. Say, look, you can come anytime you want. So Arakshi arrives tomorrow. And he's not going to talk only to Ishaq Dar. He's going to talk to the top guys, Prime Minister and Chief of the Army, Field Marshal Asim Munir. This trio, Munir, Ishaq Dar, and Shehbaz Sharif, the Prime Minister, they are coordinating closely with the Iranians. For the moment, let's say 0.1% on a scale from 0 to 100 of reopening the negotiations, of course, the Dead Cat MOU, resuscitating it once again. But everybody knows the Iranian conditions because they have been very explicit. And for over 2 months already. Why do I say over 2 months or 2 months? Because on August 16, which is next week, it's the end of the 60-day clock inbuilt in the MOU. And obviously, as we know, nothing happened because the Americans blew up the MOU. So now this diplomatic channel is trying to bring the MOU back. For that, they need the Iranians to once again give, to quote John Lennon, give peace a chance. But, this is a little bit too much, isn't it? Because they gave peace a chance over and over again. And every possibility of a diplomatic understanding was destroyed by the Americans. So tomorrow in Islamabad, they're going to have Arakshi discussing with the three Pakistanis. Okay, what happens next? Inside Iran, Glenn, at the top level, it's very complicated. And this is something that we could confirm with our Iranian friends and sources. There is, how can I put it diplomatically? A divergence of strategic opinions between the diplomatic vector and the more hardline military vector. For instance, Vahidi, the commander-in-chief of the IRGC, in public, he said that President Pezeshkian should resign, which is something very, very serious. Why? Because he's completely opposed to any possibility of negotiating with the Americans. So this means essentially Pezeshkian as the president and Arakshi as Minister of Foreign Affairs. And of course, the majority of the RGC generals, they are against any negotiations with the Americans because basically they're saying, look, we proved our point. They are non-negotiable. Sergei Lavrov, once again, the United States is non-agreement capable and non-negotiation capable, as we have seen, all of us have seen it. But then there's the element of Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei. Because his position is, he's the invisible leader, as everybody knows. But of course, all these major decisions, they go to the top, and he is the ultimate decider. So the fact that he gave, let's say, a chance to the diplomatic channel to go on, and to have discussions about the MOU, even though he was opposed to the MOU from the start. So the whole situation proved his point. He was correct from the start. He knew that this thing would never work with the Americans. But the thing is, at the same time, the Iranians cannot say no to diplomacy. And that's where Arakshi comes in. And Arakshi is the global face of Iranian diplomacy. He is now respected all over the world, not only in West Asia, across Eurasia, but all over the global south. So they will keep giving peace a chance. But the mood among the IRGC generals, including the commander-in-chief of the IRGC, Fahidi, the mood in the streets, as we saw during the funeral ceremonies related to the burial of Ayatollah Khamenei, all across Iran, from Tehran and Qom all the way to Mashhad and all the provinces. It's impossible to have an understanding with the Americans. So the leadership, they have to pay attention to the streets, but they have to pay attention to this divergence of opinions between the political vector and the military vector. So it's a very, very complicated position, but they're not closing down the door to diplomacy. On the contrary, this trip by Arakshi tomorrow is basic to, once again, coordinate with the Pakistanis, who are talking not only to the Americans, because Asim Munir has a direct connection with the White House, one of the very few. How can we describe him? He's not a political leader. He is the most important military authority in Pakistan. He is the top man in charge. There's no other way to put it, right? And he has Trump on speed dial. Very few people have that. So, and they are also talking to Saudi Arabia, which and all of us and a great deal of our audience knows, they made the supreme stupidity of picking a fight at the same time with Yemen and with the Popular Mobilization units in Iraq. And now they have to backtrack. And according to what our Pakistani mediator sources, they told Larry Johnson and myself, and we asked over and over again, so what is your position vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia? They said, look, our political leadership basically told them, stand down. This means Islamabad told Riyadh, we are not going to pick your fights, and we're not going to be involved if you pick a big fight again with Yemen and now with Iraq as well. So for the moment, Saudi Arabia appears to have listened to it. But of course, once again, to make the whole thing even more complicated, is Saudi Arabia supporting this diplomatic channel trying to resuscitate the MOU? Nobody knows for sure. The Pakistanis, they tell us, look, our impression is that they understand the stakes. And the fact that MBS called Trump this past weekend personally and said, don't go on with your gates of hell adventure, because all of us in the GCC were. So this would imply that they know the stakes. But with Saudi Arabia, as you know very well, Glenn, because it's such an opaque regime, we never know what really goes on. There's no access for anybody to know how MBS makes his decisions. So this is a huge interrogation point in this already extremely complex situation. But the main takeaway, to answer your question directly, okay, the headline to answer your question directly, the MOU, that cat is not dead yet. They're trying a resuscitation program. We don't know if it's going to work or not.
Well,
it's tough. It's very tough, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I've always been quite pessimistic about the MOU, but at the heart of the conflict now, though, is what makes it impossible for Trump to declare victory and go home, essentially, is the Strait of Hormuz. This is a massive problem. And I've seen now two pieces of news which are somewhat in conflict. At least it appears so. The first one is that the Iranians and Oman are close to a deal. They're still disagreeing on the amount of fees which they would collectively, charge from the transiting ships. And of course, the United States demands no fees at all, but again, it doesn't get a veto power in this, it appears. So this is the one news. The other one is that the Iranian state media apparently reports that the Iranian parliament is pushing a bill in which they would then just formalize control over the Strait of Hormuz, and this would prohibit passage of vessels belonging to Israel, the United States, and the countries who have caused damage to Iran. They must pay compensation before they can use the strait again. So again, this will be, I guess, a hardline bill in the Iranian parliament. I think so. This seems not to harmonize completely with what the Iranians and Oman are negotiating. So how do you see the Strait of Hormuz on the diplomatic front?
Of course, this is the absolute key issue even before February 28th, because no one should ever forget that this war has nothing to do with the Iranian nuclear dossier. This is an oil war. This is an oil choke point and choke point war. This is a war that was to make sure that the Strait of Hormuz and beyond, and every form of energy exported by Iran, which should have gone through regime change in the first 48 hours of the war, will be based in petrodollars and not in petro-yuan or other currencies. So all that went downhill in the course of the war. So now we are in a completely different situation where Iran is affirming its control of this absolutely key energy choke point. Like forever, the whole thing has changed, and it's absolutely impossible, not only for Trump. Trump is a messenger for American elites to actually admit the extent of this strategic defeat. And that's the point that is being discussed by the Iranian parliament right now. We're going to solidify our control of the Strait of Hormuz in detail, which is something that they have been talking about from the beginning, after the first days of the war started on February 28th. What we have at the moment on the table, on the negotiating table, and that's the only thing being negotiated at the moment. Everything that we see being spun by American mainstream media essentially is nonsense. There is only one negotiation going on at the moment, and it's a technical channel. And we managed to confirm that with our Iranian friends. Iranian technicians and Omani technicians are sitting on the same table and discussing a temporary, and it's not even long term. The long-term deal will be the one that is being discussed at the Majlis, at the parliament. For the moment, the Omanis and the Iranians are discussing a temporary arrangement, which is quite simple. Everything sailing into the Strait of Hormuz is subjected to IRGC Navy, their procedures, the Persian Gulf Authority, the new body, PGSA, payment of fees, administrative fees, whatever that, humanitarian fees, maintenance, security, whatever. And everybody sailing out of the Persian Gulf, there will be two stages. First, they will be cleared by the Omani authorities, but everything will be supervised by the Iranian authorities. So what we have essentially being discussed and practically approved between, once again, strictly Tehran and Muscat. Nobody else is part of this negotiation. Nobody in the Persian Gulf, outside, whatever. 100% Iranian control coming in, and let's say 50% Iranian control going out. This is what's being discussed, and it could be announced in the next, let's say, next few days, quite possible. So there are two parallel tracks. One is the technical track, Iran-Oman, temporary, and the other one, this is the big deal. What the Majlis, the Iranian parliament, will institutionalize as the new the new deal, the new groove, whatever you want to discuss in terms of who navigates inside and outside of the Strait of Hormuz. So this is when this is approved by the parliament, the Trump administration is going to be beyond freaking out with unexpected consequences, as we all know. But very important for the moment, we have two parallel tracks, and they are not intersecting.
Well, the overarching objective for Iran, though, for long-term peace is to, well, essentially get the United States out of the region. And I was wondering how could this be done? Does it entail? Can it be done through controlling the Strait of Hormuz, or does it entail destroying, like physically, all the bases in the region? Is it pressuring the Gulf states? Because something appears to be shifting a bit. That is, the Iranians going on the offensive, that is attacking Jordan in this way. This was kind of interesting, and you can interpret it in many ways. One, the Iranians are going after American bases, but at the same time, you see all these officials and experts in Jordan signing this letter that it's time to get the U.S. bases out of Jordan. So is this what is the pathway essentially for well, there's different pathways for Iran to expel the United States from the Middle East?
Well, Glenn, the whole the way the chessboard is being changed by Iran reflects their self-confidence, and this is something that we saw during the week of the ceremonial week of the burial of Ali Khamenei, part of his family, etc., the processions, the people in the streets, how this was viewed in Iraq, in the both sacred cities of Najaf and Karbala. And of course, how the leadership, starting with leader Mojtaba Khamenei, and of course, the Supreme National Security Council, and then both vectors, the diplomatic vector, which is the one that everybody follows because Arakshi is on the headlines literally every hour, and the more complicated military IRGC vector. They feel confident that they have already inflicted a strategic defeat on the Americas. The extent of this strategic defeat is what they are trying to negotiate among themselves now. Like, how far should we push that? How far we're going to humiliate the Trump administration on a daily basis? And this has several vectors, once again. The most obvious for everyone following it is the progressive destruction of the US bases all across the Persian Gulf and beyond. Beyond means essentially Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan and in Jordan. That pounding day after day, which is now even Pentagon generals recognize that these bases are practically gone. So we have a concourse of circumstances which is immensely negative to the Trump administration. They are running out of everything. Patriots, stats, whatever, everything. They're running out of bases. In fact, they had to transfer most of it to Israel, which is, from a Sun Tzu point of view, is brilliant because the Iranians managed to put the US inside the Israeli box. The repercussions are going to be, wow, mind-boggling. We're not there yet. They know everything about the timelines because they run the clock. So this means that next week, mid-August, like everybody was predicting, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, everybody and his neighbor, It's the red line for the depletion of the American strategic petroleum reserves. So they won't get away with putting loads of oil on the market to lower prices. That's it. And Trump knows that. And Trump knows the date, and Trump knows this is next week. And of course, they know that in terms of the diplomatic channel we were discussing in the beginning of our show, being reopened, it will have to be reopened according to what was signed by both presidents, and it's in the MOU. End of all wars, start paying, giving Iran's money back, sanctions relief, no more war against Lebanon, you name it. Discussion about the Strait of Hormuz, obviously. And the Iranians are saying, look, it has to follow our order of priorities. And the Americans are saying, no, the first thing to discuss is the nuclear dossier. And the Iranians are saying, no, we explained to you over and over again, and it is in the MOU. The last stage is to discuss the nuclear dossier. To make it even more complicated, the Americans have no clue whatsoever about how much enriched uranium Iran has, and where is it? Did they disperse it? They don't know. Where is it? They have no idea. Because, of course, the IAEA has not been inspecting for months. Are they on the verge of building a nuclear weapon? They don't know. Look, if anybody in the Trump administration was listening to Professor Ted Postel, Professor Ted Postel said, look, depending on what they have, they could build 10 nuclear bombs in a matter of 2 weeks with the amount of enriched uranium that they had the last time it was certified. So the Americans basically don't know anything about anything. And on top of it, the depletion of everything concerning their strategic hegemony in the Persian Gulf and West Asia is evaporating. So what cards do they have? No cards at all, as many of us have been saying for weeks, if not months, right? Which adds to their strategic despair, in fact. And it was leading towards an absolutely demented decision to provoke the gates of hell by bombing Iran again. And then we needed to have, for instance, people like MBS calling Trump and say, don't do this because you're gonna get us all killed. All of us in West Asia. So, this is the short version of the complexity in front of us. The Iranians, they look at all that and they say, wow, this is going according to our plan and maybe even better. Because we're actually driving this American administration completely nuts because they are boxed in and there's no way out. And the only off-ramp de facto for them is to fulfill their commitments that they signed officially at the MOU, the 14-point MOU, which we all know Trump will never do. So once again, Glenn, even the way out and the off ramp is now off. So what's left?
Well, it does get a bit more complicated too, because even if there's the deal on the Strait of Hormuz is reached and the Americans decide that they will fall in line, then still there's all these other components, as you said, everything from nuclear issue, but even the conflicts now, which have extended beyond Iran and the US. So the war in Lebanon, there's also quite that Iran will want some more concessions to include Yemen. That is Ansar Allah, referred to as the Houthis in the West. They are supposed to be, they will look for a deal for them as well. The Iraqi militias, which are also somewhat aligned with Iran. I mean, all of these are issues which has to be resolved. I mean, does this have to be broken into many smaller deals then, or how? It just seems like this huge mess which has been made is it's very difficult to put this thing back together.
Absolutely, Glenn. And but the most important point is all of that is inbuilt in the MOU. The beginning of the MOU says it, and that's the problem because the language is very ambiguous. End of all wars. End of all wars means all the wars of the US and Israel against the whole axis of resistance: Iran, Hezbollah, Ansar Allah, and Hashd al-Shabi, people mobilization units in Iraq. The whole axis of resistance. And the axis of resistance now is working hyper coordinated. Hezbollah is a little bit outside. They're just waiting. If Israel tries something more radical, Hezbollah will enter the chat, re-enter the chat big time. But for the moment, after that bombing, which was US-Saudi joint bombing of the PMUs in Iraq, of Hashd al-Shabi, someone's going to have to, there will be blood. There will be a retribution. They didn't do anything because it was Arbaigin until a few days ago. And Yemen, they are self-sufficient actors. They don't need anybody to tell them anything because they have their own strategic game and they are very good at playing it. And they basically sent the message indirectly to Saudi Arabia. If you continue like this, we're going to destroy everything in your oil industry. And they have the means to do it with their ballistic missiles. So this is apart from the bigger picture. And there was something that it keeps coming back to me because it was the confirmation that I got from probably my best Yemeni friend, which is also a source in Sana. I asked him directly, why did you choose this particular moment 2 weeks ago to blockade Saudi Arabia? You could have done this before. After all, there is a memorandum of understanding between Sana and Riyadh signed in 2019, and the Saudis broke it. And there is an illegal blockade, an aerial blockade by Saudi Arabia against Yemen for over 11 years, And his answer was outstanding. In fact, look, our intelligence, Ansar Allah intelligence, and also with Iranians, and we coordinated with the Iranians to see if they were reaching the same conclusion. We established that the Americans were ready to launch a massive war, not only against Iran, or restart the war against Iran, but it would be a massive offensive against the whole axis of resistance, ourselves, Ansar Allah included. So we preempted that. We created an extra headache for them in terms of Saudi Arabia. Of course, we always thought that we should counteract the blockade, the siege by Saudi Arabia against a siege. And and at the time when you were reading the official Ansar Allah statement, it was written in the statement. It's a siege against a siege. So if Saudi Arabia blocks Yemen, especially ports, airports, also ports, same thing. They didn't start with airports. They said, look, we're going to block all Saudi ports in the Red Sea. If I remember well, there are 4. But this could go, not sideways, but upwards. And then, okay, and then we're going to start bombing our oil installations. If you bomb our infrastructure, we're going to bomb your infrastructure as well. And of course, the whole Bab al-Mandeb question, it was and it is a selective blockade. Only Saudi tankers leaving the Red Sea. If you are a Saudi tanker and you are exporting oil to China, you're not blockaded by Yemen. You can go because there is a direct Beijing-Sana agreement. So that once again, it's one complication. It's a matryoshka of complications, as you know very, very well. And there is no easy solution for all of these problems at the same time. So basically what the Iranians are, their new upgrading of their decentralized mosaic strategy is that, okay, we deal with each of these complications on a case-by-case basis, and each of these problems on a case-by-case basis. So they are working on a solution for the Strait of Hormuz. They are working on a solution in terms of completely devastating all American air bases everywhere. They are not interfering with how the Yemen are dealing with Saudi Arabia, because theoretically, and this is something that, once again, we have to ask the Pakistani mediators all the time. Look, guys, you have a mutual defense pact with Saudi Arabia, but if Saudi Arabia starts an absolutely crazy adventure against a third country, are you going to get into it? And the Pakistanis said, no way. And we told the Saudis that, don't drag us into one of your foolish wars. So this is a completely separate thing. And of course, Iraq and Saudi Arabia is a completely different problem, because the Iraqis are going to structure their response to the US-Saudi attack on their own. So we have, at the same time, a coordination between all these vectors of the axis of resistance, and at the same time, they preserve their ability to find their own solutions to their own specific problems. And that's why the whole thing is so complicated. It's very far from monolithic, you know.
My last question is about another layer of complexity.
Another layer, of course.
Well, that is, during all of this, Israel's been awfully quiet, and it has a lot to stand to lose from this U.S. defeat in Iran and this peace deals, or diplomatic solutions, which are now beginning to take shape. On the other hand, if the U.S. is successful somehow in knocking out Iran, this would be the head of the snake for the Israelis, which they've been lobbying for decades now to defeat the Iranians. This is their one chance, and it's a all or nothing game pretty much for them. And again, they have been somewhat quiet in all of this, but I assume that probably won't be the case if a bad deal begins to materialize. So I guess my question would be twofold. How is the role of Israel impacted from this? And also, what can Israel do now? Because, as I said, they have a lot to lose here.
Well, the only thing they know how to do, Glenn, as you, our audience, and probably 98% of the planet knows, is to kill people. This is what they will continue to do. They will try to kill people. Kill people means killing members of the Iranian leadership, and try by all means to sabotage the possibility of the MOU being back on track. They will do everything to sabotage it. The problem is their interest now is against US interests. So then we'll be able to see everybody will be able to see very clearly if the Trump administration is thinking in terms of US national interests, or if they once again being controlled by Israeli wider interests and a wider Eretz Israel program. So this would be quite, I would say, enlightening for the whole planet to see live in front of all of us. But for the moment, they have to be awfully quiet, because first of all, they cannot interfere in the possibility that the Americans themselves are selling. They are selling throughout this week via Western mainstream media. A deal is now imminent. So obviously the Israelis are waiting to see what kind of deal. Even though there is no deal, we all know. And the Iranians said, no, there's no deal because we're not discussing with the Americans. We are discussing with the Omanis about the Strait of Hormuz. But if we have even a temporary mechanism for the Strait of Hormuz, and then a few days later, we have the Iranian parliament finally approving what's going to be the final status of the Strait of Hormuz, then the American administration, of course, will go batshit crazy, and the Israelis might join in. But for what? Another war? Restarting the war? Another attack? the return of gates of hell. With what? They don't have it. They don't have what it takes. And now Israel is even more vulnerable than they were before. And the Iranians are looking at this status of Israel now as the American bases all being transferred to Israeli territory. And American bases boxed inside Israel. For Iran, this is a dream scenario. And they have the weapons to devastate all of that in a matter of days with the next generation ballistic missiles that they haven't even used yet. So it's in terms of all those everything that was spun in the first few days after the decapitation strike on February 28th, and all the targets that they had, the way the whole thing was turned completely upside down by facts on the ground, facts on the battlefield, and diplomatic facts as well. It's no wonder that they have to. Of course, they are incapable of self-reflection. Those people in power in Israel, but of course, a few IQs, and there are over there, are probably thinking, okay, how this whole thing went wrong the way, and is there anything we can do to go back to the situation before February 28th? No, that's impossible, because the emergence of Iran as a top regional power in West Asia and one of the top powers in Eurasia and one of the top powers in the global South now is irreversible.
Yeah, this is I think the painful part for the US, because I think for Trump, his main thought was, well, we'll have a go at this, and if it doesn't work, we can always go back to the old status quo, and we will
There's
have
no
bomb,
more.
we will have bombed the Iranians. They will be weakened a bit. We will have shown we have shown the consequences of defying the United States. And everything essentially went the other way as Iran refuses to go back to the old status quo. And indeed, this makes it impossible for the US to do anything. I mean, I still remember last year when the United States decided that, yes, things were going well in Yemen, just say, okay, well, declare victory and go home. It's just the fact that this isn't a possibility. I mean, I guess, how do you see sorry, I'll do one more last question. The US domestic situation, that becomes another layer to this, because even if Trump and his administration realizes, this is as good as it gets, the longer we delay this, the harder the Iranian demands will be, and the worse off we will be. And of course, I think the Iranians are looking at the depleted weapons stockpiles of the United States and realizing that their negotiation hand is strengthening every day. By the way, I saw Trump going on social media saying he would hunt down all these people who are leaking the fake news. But if it's fake news, he's actually just going to hunt down anyone and put them in jail. If they're arguing that they have a shortage on on missiles. So that's a very interesting. I'm not sure how that conforms with the freedom of speech in the United States. But anyways, I was just thinking, if the US is in a worse and worse position, yes, he wants to make a deal, but that will be, pragmatism. That will be the rational thing to do. However, they do have domestic politics in the United States. And, Trump, he keeps, saying that we're winning. The Iranians are begging us for a deal. Oh, we gave them a test with the MOU. They failed it. So now we really want, to turn the screws on them. So, with all this BS, the narrative deviating so far from reality, it's going to be hard. And also they have their midterms coming up. So how do you see this affecting the ability of the Americans to, well, I guess, come to terms with the new realities on the ground?
They will never come to terms with the new realities on the ground. Don't forget that this is an empire that thought that they would have a free lunch throughout the 21st century. And now they are reduced to this position of being humiliated by a mid-sized power under sanctions for 47 years. And with their defense budget is, how much is it? 1/500th smaller than the United States, or something along these lines. Talk about a strategic defeat and a strategic humiliation. This is unheard of in modern history. And of course, when you have, I took the pleasure of uploading to my Telegram channel a very good piece in the New Yorker about Roy Cohn, the Jewish mafioso that taught all the tricks in the book to a young Donald Trump. It's an excerpt of a new book about Roy Cohn. And it's all there. And it's excellent to give anyone, what is the psychological profile of Donald Trump? All the lessons that he absorbed from Roy Cohn. Never concede defeat. Never concede that you made a mistake. If you make a mistake, blame others. Always pose as alpha man, macho man, the guy in charge. Never answer when somebody tries to contradict you. And play the media. Turn everything into a World Wrestling Federation spectacle. Twist the narrative. Control the narrative. Full time. Speak very, very loud. Speak louder than anybody else full time. Using a very reduced vocabulary so anybody with a 0 grade education can understand. It's no wonder that Trump's vocabulary is what, 60, 70 words, not more than that, essentially. So it's all there. So he learned everything from Roy Cohn. And as president of the United States, he is implementing that on a global scale. But the problem is that everybody in a global scale, in positions of power, diplomacy, military, geopolitical, geoeconomic, already knows how he thinks, how he reacts, and what disturbs him completely. And the Iranians are using that with, extreme sophistication. They are literally driving the president of the United States crazy. And all that because a fateful decision that he made in the first place. So that's why this is not a Greek tragedy, a traditional Greek tragedy. It is really a very trashy American pop remake of a Greek tragedy, But this is what we are living, Glenn, unfortunately.
Yeah, I keep thinking the optimism they had at the beginning of this century, this was going to be the new American century. This was going to belong to America. They would cement perpetual dominance essentially, and how quickly that went off the rails. Anyways, Pepe, as always, thank you so much for your time and your analysis.
An enormous pleasure, Glenn. Let's keep rocking. What else can we do?
Israel is telling CENTCOM, they informed the Israeli military, did Commander Admiral Bradley Cooper of CENTCOM, that Israel does not need approval nor support from the U.S. to wage war against Iran, adding, "We are currently making preparations to start the war." Israel is preparing for a unilateral strike on Iran as it concludes that the U.S. is no longer willing to finish the war on its own terms. This is according to Channel 13 in Israel. Well, on that last point, they may have somewhat of a point. Donald Trump has quietly admitted defeat, according to the Wall Street Journal, signaling he's willing to end the war on Iran without a nuclear deal if the Strait of Hormuz simply opens, a humiliating retreat from his demand for unconditional surrender. At least this is per U.S. officials into the Wall Street Journal. Now, this is being complicated by Iran's conditions, which I know, Professor Randi, you have talked about, which have been released by Iran's Supreme National Security Council, outlining new conditions for the reopening of the strait. It not only includes a permanent end to the war, the lifting of the U.S. naval blockade, and the withdrawal of U.S. forces from the region, lifting of sanctions, the frozen assets given back, war operations, but also an end to the U.S.'s threats of military action and all conflicts, including Palestine, Lebanon, and Yemen. So, Professor Marandi, given these developments, what do you make of this report of Israel attacking alone? We've heard this before. How serious are Iranians and Iran taking this?
First, I should point out that these are not new conditions by Iran. These are within the framework of the MOU. But in the MOU, Iran doesn't, Palestine, Yemen, and Iraq aren't named, but it says all fronts. So now Iran is becoming more specific, and Iran has at the negotiating table brought up Gaza and Palestine. And the Iranians and Dr. Ghalibaf, who is the chief negotiator, did tell different Palestinian delegations that Gaza and Palestine are a part of the Iranian demands. But with regards to the United States refraining from threatening Iran, that's actually explicit. It has explicitly said in the MOU that what the statement yesterday that came out of the Supreme National Security Council basically means is that the MOU has to be fulfilled in full. In other words, the Iranians are not going to allow the Americans to interpret it in their own way, in a way in which Trump would like. So they spelled out what they said what the region means. The region means Palestine, and it didn't even say Gaza. It says Palestine. It says Yemen. So if the United States wants normalization, that's the only way forward. They have to stop exterminating Palestinian children, and they have to stop the siege and slaughter of the people of Yemen, which has been going on for well over a decade now. And the Saudi regime, they've carried out a genocide in Yemen, not dissimilar to what the Israeli regime did in Gaza, with the support of Trump and the United States, both before and after Trump, his first term in office. So that's no longer acceptable. They can no longer starve women and children in Yemen, regardless of what the Saudis may want for Iran or the Israelis and the United States, who are all clear allies. The Iranians are saying that the starvation siege in Yemen has to come to an end, and of course the same in Iraq. The U.S. and the Saudis have no right to bomb the Iraqi people whenever they like. So they've made that very clear that this will no longer be tolerated if there's good, and this has to be a part of. This has to be sorted out in any potential deal. With regards to the Israeli regime, the Israelis have no ability to wage war against Iran and come out with any success. They'll fail. They'll swiftly fail. The Iranians are prepared to destroy the regime with their missile capabilities. They'll overwhelm them, and their missile capabilities are enormous. And the Iranians have destroyed the radar defenses that the Americans have created across the region to help Israel in the Persian Gulf, in Western Saudi Arabia, in Jordan, in northern Iraq, which will make it a lot easier for Iranian drones to strike their targets. But the Israeli regime will need the United States for any war because the Americans would have to refuel their jets. just like they did during this war, and just like they did during the 12-Day War. So if the regime attacks Iran, the United States will have to be involved. And if it is involved, then that means they're waging war against Iran, and they will receive a military response. But if the Americans don't get involved, then Iranian firepower will overwhelm the regime very swiftly. Even with U.S. support, the same will happen, but it'll be much worse without the Americans. So I don't think that's the real issue. The real issue is the fact that the United States continues to pose a threat to Iran, and it has not removed any of its forces. And these American soldiers are in the region, despite the extraordinary heat of the Arabian Peninsula and the Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Oman. They've been stuck here for 6 months at least now. There is a belief that the United States could carry out attack in the days ahead, and so if anyone thinks that the war is over, they're naive. There's a possibility, despite the shortages that exist, despite the fact that the munitions of the U.S. military are very low in some key areas. But we have to remember that the Israeli regime and the Zionist lobby, they still are extremely powerful in the United States. And they can push Trump towards war. I mean, it's not difficult to imagine them pushing Trump towards war again. They are the ones who push him in the first place. So we all recall how Joe Kent, in his resignation letter, said that Iran was not a threat to the United States. Iran was not developing a nuclear weapon. This is about the Israeli lobby and the Zionist lobby and the Israeli regime. Well, the Zionist lobby and the Israeli regime haven't gone anywhere. So the threat of war continues to exist, and the Iranians are preparing themselves. In fact, I think that there's going to be a change in the Supreme National Security Council shortly, and Iran is prepared for war. Doesn't mean it will happen, but Iran is prepared for.
Well, I was going to ask you, Professor Randi, as you were talking about the U.S. striking in the coming days, I was going to ask you whether you believe that these reports about Israel pushing the United States once again, or claiming that they are going to unilaterally strike. I find that a very interesting word to use, given that it literally outs the fact that Israel and the U.S. are coordinating on the war against Iran. But at the same time, I'm wondering how much you think that this is either plausible deniability, meaning that the United States will strike in the coming days using Israel as a cover, or is it the fact that, yeah, Israel actually is seeing that the United States wants to get out of this and the terms are highly insufficient? Iran just said they're not even talking to the U.S. right now. So the terms are obviously highly insufficient to Iran. So it's quite the quandary for the U.S., but I wonder how much you see as this as Israel pushing the U.S. back into strikes, or the U.S. just using this as plausible deniability to then rip whatever it has left in Asia and elsewhere to keep going with the war.
It's difficult to say. I don't have an answer to that question. We all recall when Rubio at the beginning of the war basically said we fought for the Israeli regime. The regime wanted to launch a war, so we got involved in the war. So that could easily happen again. The United States is very obedient to the Israeli regime and the Zionist lobby, and Trump has been the most obedient of all U.S. presidents. So it's hard to say. What I do think, though, is important to remember is the Iranian threat that if the United States launches attacks on Iran's infrastructure, Iran will wipe out the infrastructure of the countries that are complicit in this war. And of course, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the Emirates, or Kuwait. I think I said them all. I'm not sure. And perhaps even Oman. They're all, and of course the Israeli regime. They're all complicit in this war. So they're all a part of this war. They're all partners in crime. Sometimes I see these, these bot or these, these trolls and bots online saying that Iran is striking like, the Arab countries. This is where the United States is waging its war from, and they are funding. I may have told you this before. The Arab regimes in the Persian Gulf, they are funding the war. They pay the United States for those bases. It's, you would think it's the other way around, that like the United States goes and takes this piece of land and then they pay a rent and they use that base. No, these countries, they pay for all the costs. So they're paying for a big chunk of the war expenditure, whether it's the Emirates or the Qataris or the Saudis or the Bahrainis or the Kuwaitis. In the case of Jordan, it's probably just handed over free to the United States because Jordan is extremely obedient to the Americans. So they are all a part of this war, and they will suffer the consequences. But it's not only going to be their problem. If their infrastructure is destroyed, that means their countries will collapse, and that includes Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia won't survive. I don't think he'll survive. And when that happens, I think it's pretty clear that the global markets will crash, because when people wake up and see these sites burning in the news, that will bring a panic to the markets. There's no way that anyone is going to be able to talk up the markets or manipulate the markets then. So even if the Strait of Hormuz is open, then that doesn't make a difference anymore, because there will be nothing left to export or import. So we have to, always keep this in mind, that the Iranians this is their deterrence. The Iranians did not start the war; they did not escalate, but they're the victims. But this is deterrence. If Trump actually does go and try to exterminate the Iranian people and to wipe out the civilization and to destroy the infrastructure so that the state would collapse, then have no doubt that Iran will destroy those regimes that assisted the United States. The only difference is that Iran will not collapse, but those regimes definitely will. And that will bring down the global economy. And then many governments will come down, including many U.S. allies beyond these countries. So it's not, this is a very, very serious situation. But again, we don't know if the United States is going to do this or not. But it seems, they have not removed anything from the region. All of their assets are in place. And of course, Iran is building up its defenses. It's building new missiles, new drones. It's expanding its underground cities, missile cities, drone cities. It's preparing for a potential land offensive. They are preparing, but that doesn't mean the United States won't carry out another war of aggression.
That fact that you stated earlier, that the Gulf states are paying for the U.S. to essentially militarily occupy their countries and use them as basing stations for war, is an astounding one, and people should understand this from the standpoint of sovereignty, that these states don't have sovereignty. And this was back in 2020, during the first Donald Trump administration. Right toward the end, CNN reported that Saudi Arabia had paid $500 million in one sitting toward the cost of shouldering and having U.S. troops in their country, back when there was an increase in U.S. troops stationed there, and about 2,000 more. So just that alone. And Donald Trump at that time also was boasting that Saudi Arabia literally put $1 billion into the U.S. Treasury directly, in order to make good on this huge agreements that he had with the Gulf states, which were simply mafia-like agreements between these states. But Professor Morandi, despite this, Israel, what gives Israel the confidence to make these statements to the media about attacking Iran unilaterally, given that Iran has already went through what seems to be a very strategic campaign to decimate the layer of defenses that were protecting Israel at one time, particularly the most important one, which was Jordan, and the air defenses that were there. Those are essentially gone and are not likely to come back in any significant way anytime soon. So what gives Israel the confidence to make these threats, do you think?
I don't know how confident they really are. I'm pretty sure that Netanyahu knows what this will lead to, but he's a desperate person. He wants to remain in power. I think the elections in the Israeli regime are maybe a week before the elections in the United States. So we have about 2.5 months left till their elections, and he wants to look. He'll do anything to remain in power. These could be threats just to increase confidence among the population, which clearly believes that they lost the war. We know from polls that I think roughly 90% of the Israeli population believes that they lost the war against Iran. So perhaps he wants to strengthen morale, boost morale. Perhaps this is an attempt to intimidate so that the regime in the United States could gain concessions. I don't know. I have no idea. But perhaps it's also being said to push the United States towards attacking Iran. Going back to what the U.S. Secretary of State said at the beginning of the war, that the Israelis were going to attack, so we decided to attack too. I think that's more or less what he said.
Yeah, and well, here's the poll that you're referring to. 90%, 2% of Israelis believe Iran emerged as the winner after this war, and this was back during the original signing of the Memorandum of Understanding back in June. So, yeah, not a lot of morale on the Israeli side, at least on the settler side of things around this war. Well, speaking of Saudi Arabia, Professor Morandi, what do you make of the latest round of strikes and in this counter siege by Yemen? There are incredible reports right now of Yemen not only hitting Aramco again in Jazan, their oil refinery, but also now hitting gas, the Saudi Aramco Berry gas plant in Al Jubail, Saudi Arabia. So major escalations there, and no sign that Saudi Arabia is tapping out just yet. So what do you make of this, especially in light of this so-called Mecca, NATO, whatever the hell it's supposed to be, agreement between the three states? You call them backstabbing states, Saudi Arabia. Well, Pakistan, a little more complex, but Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Pakistan. What do you make of all this?
We know that the Saudis consider Yemen to be their backyard, which is, of course, not something that Yemen accepts. Yemen is an ancient civilization. It is a civilizational state. It's been around far, far before Saudi Arabia ever existed, many times over, many times over. So the Saudis have tried to starve Yemen since 2015 and slaughter them into obedience. They did what they did to Yemen in 2015 with the green light of Obama, not Trump. What they did to Yemen was not dissimilar to what the Israeli regime did to Gaza. And this was one of the great crimes of our time. And the only difference was that the genocidal attacks were carried out in silence. There wasn't much news. They were bombing schools, they were bombing school buses, they were bombing funerals. I think in one funeral they killed like hundreds of people. They starved the population. American ships and other ships in the Red Sea, they would block boats from taking food or medicine into Yemen. I recall one former U.S. Official, or someone affiliated to the, I think he was military, saying that he was on a ship in the Red Sea and they blocked it. They stopped the boat and it was full of medicine, and the American Navy dumped it into the sea, the medicine, which was destined for Yemen. So that's what they were trying to do. It was, another Gaza. But the only difference was that Yemen, being larger and much more capable, it had the armed forces of Yemen and Ansar Allah were able to fight back and resist. And the Saudis had the same support that they have now. The collective West was supporting them. We all recall what they were doing, and then the region was supporting them. All of these countries, all of the countries in the region, of course, except for Iran, they were supporting Saudi Arabia and the Emirates in carrying out this genocidal war. Of course, a couple of years later, after Saudi Arabia and the Emirates imposed a siege on Qatar, the Doha distanced itself, and so did Erdogan, because he and the Qatari regime are bound to one another. So then later they distanced themselves. In fact, I remember I was on Al Jazeera a couple of times at the beginning of the genocidal war in Yemen on a show called Inside Story twice. And then after that, I was no longer invited on Al Jazeera for a very, very long time. Sort of like in Syria. In Syria, it was the same. They stopped inviting me. They banned me for a while. And then after Yemen, it was the same. So everyone was on board with this, with this murderous assault. Well, back then, Yemen was weaker than now. And Saudi Arabia was stronger. And Saudi Arabia was more wealthy. And Saudi Arabia wasn't facing the circumstances that it is facing today. So if any country assists Saudi Arabia in this war, it's not going to make it any better than it was back then. And back then, ultimately, the Saudi regime failed. When Yemen began to develop its own missile industry and its drone industry, they have smart young engineers, very smart and dedicated people. Of course, Iran helped, but the Yemeni, they made it an indigenous industry, and they built their own underground bases, as we saw when the Americans launched their war against Yemen, because Yemen was supporting the people of Gaza, and the Americans failed. So these young men and perhaps women, I don't know, they began firing at Saudi oil assets, and Saudi Arabia was forced to end the war and accept a ceasefire. But ever since then, they've continued to impose a siege on Yemen. And when an Iranian commercial airline was taking a delegation back from Iran, that was the delegation that was taking part in the funeral of Ayatollah Khamenei, the martyr, they bombed the airport as the Iranian plane was moving to land, a commercial plane where, with an ordinary crew of men and women. That outraged Iran, and of course, it was an act of war against Yemen. So everyone should be siding with Yemen instead of collaborating with Saudi Arabia. I mean, no country created a coalition with Saudi Arabia over Gaza, over Lebanon, over Syria. I mean, look at Syria right now. They've occupied huge parts of the southern part of the country. Where's the coalition to push back the Israelis there? Or in Lebanon, where the Israeli regime is occupying the south of the country. And as we speak, they're destroying all the forests. They're burning down all the forests in southern Lebanon. They're destroying the villages that go back hundreds of years, and now they're destroying the whole environment, everything. They're turning the southern part of Lebanon into a wasteland. Where's the Saudi coalition over for them? Where's the Saudi coalition for the West Bank? So it's only for the enemies of the United States that these coalitions are built. Must be some coincidence.
Yeah, well, some have remarked, Professor Randi, that what could be happening right now is some kind of strategy of tension, because you have the United States on the one hand constantly leaking to the media through these anonymous officials that they want to get out of the war, but they only really care about the Strait of Hormuz, and they want to do some kind of basic trade with Iran. And Iran has made it very clear, as has been the case since June and since before June, that the MOU terms and now expanded terms are the ones that Iran will take. And then you have Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, and Israel, all engaging in their own kind of either aggression or both a combination of aggression and, just out and out warmongering, as we see against Yemen. So, many people believe that the United States and Donald Trump is trying to taco out of this, but the landscape doesn't really support that. So, how do you see
Out of what?
Taco out of the war? Taco out of war, and
taco.
Taco, to
I thought you said talk them out of. Okay,
oh no. That's my Boston accent there. Taco out of war. But the landscape again seems to not support this, despite all of the reports. So how do you see this overall landscape? Because now it does include now Turkey and Pakistan. They're in this so-called Mecca Defense Pact, but the landscape doesn't support what Iran had said about it, which was, they support independent security alliances and whatnot, and only that can only be positive. But the landscape looks like actually the U.S. is constantly trying to push its vassals and its proxies to.
I don't think. I mean, if you mean this Saudi-led coalition with this pact, I don't think it's all that serious. I mean, Yemen today bombed in retaliation Saudi Arabia, and there hasn't been any response from Turkey. The Turkish Air Force has not bombed Yemen yet or anything like that. So for the moment, I don't think that's really serious. It's not going to look good. I mean, there's a lot of criticism of what Turkey did in Turkey because of the nature of the Saudi regime and because of the broader regional political and military situation. So I don't see that really as a big issue. Although I do think that the chances for war a new active war assault by the United States is quite possible. I'm not saying it's probable because I don't know, but I do know that people here are taking the situation very seriously, and of course the United States, as usual, they have their assets based in Saudi Arabia, in the Emirates, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in Qatar, in Oman, in Jordan. They have a lot of the radar installations, as I said, were destroyed, although the ones in Turkey continue to function. And then there's the Israeli regime, where and also assets are stored in countries outside of the region as well, for a possible attack. So it's impossible to really say what will happen because Trump is Trump. And even though it may sound reasonable for him to end the war and to just implement the MOU as he promised to do, but that's not how Trump functions, and that's not what the Israeli regime and the Zionist lobby want. So, and as we've discussed this before on multiple occasions, and every day that goes by, the global economic situation deteriorates. It's been moving more slowly than I thought 4 or 5 months ago, but it's still moving in that direction, especially now that the Red Sea is closed to Saudi oil. I mean, the Strait of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait is closed, and the Saudis are being attacked in retaliation to their attacks. That has cut their oil exports even further, and the Emirates is not exporting oil either right now. So the situation is worsening rapidly, but more slowly than at least I anticipated 2 2-3 months ago.
Yeah, and then with the economic situation, it is like it's a desperate one in that it seems like the United States is taking every measure, not just emptying its reserves, but also working with various countries, especially in Asia, to try to also weather this. So that explains some of the slowing there. And with the weapons crisis and the defense systems crisis that have been talked about for days and days now, the United States does just continue to pull from places. I think a lot of the big crisis about the shortages for the U.S. empire is that the longer it goes against Iran, these dreams of some kind of confrontation with China and Russia, which were always, I think, incredibly fantastical and catastrophic to even consider. But nevertheless, there are many neocons who want this. So the United States has been actually pulling air defense, systems and all of that, and shipping them to their base in West Asia, and that what explains why the U.S. can continue to start these smaller acts of war than rather than not be able to at all. So, I wonder what you have to say about this, Professor Marandi, this notion that, the longer the U.S. tries to defeat Iran, the more incapable it is of expressing and meeting its own interests as an empire outside of Iran, meaning these other countries that the United States has ire toward and, of course, has a deep desire to weaken and destroy.
Well, it was Robert Kagan, right, in the Atlantic, who wrote that article saying that this was the biggest defeat of the United States ever, bigger than Vietnam, for a host of reasons. Well, that was before the last chapter of the war. That was before the United States resumed the war after it violated the MOU. And this last chapter didn't go well for the United States. In fact, it was worse than the 40 days of fighting because Iranian missiles and drones were hitting hard everywhere. And the United States was not achieving any success in the Strait of Hormuz. It was attempting to open the strait. So the situation today for the Trump regime is worse than when that article was written. And this is draining U.S. wealth. It's draining U.S. military capabilities. All these military assets that have been gathered in the region, they're not being protected in ideal conditions. There are a lot of this high-tech equipment is in a very humid and very hot environment, and these bases were not built to store all this, especially since the bases which did exist, they're all destroyed now. So in the height of summer, the United States is storing its equipment in conditions that are not ideal, and the Americans have to constantly bring new equipment, and planes constantly go back and forth. And of course, they can't use ships for the Persian Gulf anymore because the Iranians won't allow it. So instead of bringing goods by ship, they have to send them by plane. So the costs for the U.S. military are enormous. And of course, meanwhile, the rest of the world is the Chinese are building their infrastructure, and the Russians, the pressure on Russia has decreased because the United States is focusing less on Ukraine. So it's fighting in West Asia and in Ukraine on multiple fronts. The Chinese, meanwhile, are watching and definitely very happy to see the United States decline in its strength. And the world blames the United States and the Israeli regime for this whole catastrophic episode, which no one knows when it's going to end nor how it's going to end. So nothing of. I mean, this has been you've discussed this before, and your audience can describe the situation better than I. They're all politically aware, but every day that goes by, things just get worse for the United States.
Mm.
And by the way, now you have to take Japan into consideration, the bond market, and then Trump, when he came to the Persian Gulf region, he was expecting these countries to he from the beginning he wants to milk these countries as much as possible, and he wanted these countries to contribute to the to the AI industry in the United States and send trillions of dollars to the United States. Well, not only are these countries not making any money to send to the United States, the Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, but also because of the situation, they're going to have to start withdrawing money from the United States. They're going to have to start selling bonds, and there are indications that they are already doing this. And these are societies that are, they consume a lot.
Revolutionary salute to our Queen Stacy Starr for the donations for the 67 Jews to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, Queen. Salute, Queen. Appreciate you.
Lot more than any other country. I mean, more than any other Asian country or African or American or European country. They consume a lot, and so the expenses, the amount of money that they'll need to withdraw is going to be huge. And the longer this situation continues, the more difficult it is going to be. Some of them have more, but some of them don't have all that much. The Saudis are not as wealthy as many people think. They've wasted a lot of money in the genocidal war against Yemen. They wasted a lot of money on those mega projects, the line and all these other foolish endeavors. And of course, all of these countries have royal families that take their billions upon billions of dollars. So this is not good for the United States.
Yet we still have this narrative for us from Rondi. I'll just pull up Christian Zionist fanatic and U.S. envoy to Israel, Mike Huckabee. I feel like this narrative is coming up more and more now that Iran is very, very weak, but, and then there's always a but now. Here's what he said to Fox News today.
The Iranian regime is weaker than it has been in 47 years. The infliction of harm to them and of pain to them is not something that is imagined. Their ability to produce a nuclear weapon has been greatly set back, but their missile capacity, unfortunately, has grown. And in 1 year, they went from being able to deliver a ballistic missile from 2,000 kilometers to over 4,100 kilometers. That puts their capacity to touch any city in most of Europe: London, Paris, Berlin, Rome. All of those cities are now in the just sites of Iran.
So Iran is in a worse position than in the last 47 years, yet it has very, very powerful missiles. And you have now, this is the latest report from Washington Post, that the Pentagon is pressing defense firms to build weapons faster as the Iran war of aggression depletes stocks, saying, and this is from Deputy Defense Secretary Steve Feinberg, telling weapons manufacturers that waiting years for the buildup of munitions and the completion of munitions production is just not going to cut it. So, Professor Rondi, what do you make of these contradictions?
Well, he is genocidal, and he is the person who said that if the Israeli regime takes all of the region, that's fine. In other words, if the Israeli regime takes Jordan and parts of Egypt and Syria, Lebanon, and parts of Saudi Arabia and parts of Iraq and parts of Turkey, and creates the Greater Israel, that's fine. And of course, the methods would be the same as we see in Gaza, the methods used, and the United States would be fully supportive. So, we're dealing with, real evil, when it comes to the elites in Washington. But we've been hearing this, that Iran is on the verge of collapse. It's weak. And at the same time, we also hear that Iran is becoming more dangerous, and which is, how can it be both at the same time? If Iran is falling apart, then how can it become more dangerous to the rest of the world? But this is something that we've been hearing for decades, and that Iran is weak, it's collapsing, it's imploding, it's unpopular, the people hate it, and then it's a growing threat, and it's dangerous to the entire world. I mean, how can it be both at the same time? But this is the narrative that we've been hearing so often, and good. I wrote. I remember when I critiqued some of these memoirs, these fake memoirs on Iran that were written, and I wrote a couple of articles that were published. I addressed these issues, and again, in that book, Going to Tehran, which I advise reviewers to purchase and to read, it goes into detail about many of these myths about Iran. So this is nothing new, what he says. This is something that has been, especially on the mainstream media, this has been said since I was a teenager.
Yeah, and now there are a lot of narratives and debates about the actual status of the war and Iran, but nevertheless, there are two that come to mind. One says, well, if the United States can actually, if the United States is correct in saying Iran is so weak, well, why can't it complete the war? Why can't it end the war on terms that are favorable to it? And the other has a conclusion that the United States actually wants this kind of prolonged, endless war, which will hopefully lead to regional chaos. And if it can't defeat Iran via regime change, it can make the region just that much more complicated, rife with issues, and therefore weaken Iran that way via isolation. But what do you make of this kind of debate? Because I think some of it has to do with the denial of maybe Iran's more favorable position than it was before the war, despite sacrifices, which of course have to be acknowledged. But what do you make of this?
Well, if the United States wants to destroy the region, it would damage the U.S. economy. I don't see how that would. It would bring about a global economic depression. I don't see how that would contribute to U.S. strength or stability at home. And of course, these cows in the region, they are there to be milked. If there's no milk, then that doesn't benefit the United States either. The United States makes a lot of money from the Persian Gulf. The largest trading partner from these countries are China. Is China, because, of course, China produces goods and the United States doesn't produce anything. But they purchase weapons, which they don't know how to use, obviously, but also all of their excess money, almost all of it, goes to the United States, and some of it goes to Europe, but it goes to buying assets in the United States, and a lot of them are stocks and bonds, and a lot of them go into U.S. bank accounts. So the United States benefits a great deal from these countries, and they're all allies of the United States. None of them do anything that harms U.S. interests. It's the exact opposite. I mean, as I said earlier, the U.S. bases in the region are all paid for by these regimes, and the Americans they use their jet fuel, expensive jet fuel, for free. It's amazing how much money they spend, and under these circumstances, where there is war, the expenditures are much higher. So these countries are contributing a great deal. So I don't believe that that's true. I think what the United States wants to do, and the Israeli regime, is to undermine Iran, because Iran is the only country that supports the Palestinian people. No one else, no other country cares. Turkey transports oil to the Israeli regime, even throughout the entire genocide. So Erdogan obviously is and all of these countries participated in that sham. Egypt, and they endorsed Trump's ceasefire in Gaza, the fake ceasefire, and they all praised Trump and whitewashed his crimes. And since then, 1,400 Palestinians have been slaughtered. And none of these countries who are guarantors of sorts, none of them have protested. None of them have built a coalition of any sort to support the Palestinian people. So none of these countries are working in a way which harms U.S. interests. They've done their best to serve the United States. And Trump has spoken highly of many of these people. He said of Erdogan, for example, that he was always there for me. He's more loyal. He said that in Egypt. He said he's more loyal than the other NATO countries during the NATO conference in Turkey. And of course, he said the same about the leaders of Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the Emirates and how fantastic they've been during the war and how much they've helped the United States in its genocidal bombings of schools and hospitals and apartment blocks across Iran. So I don't see that as a valid argument. If these countries are destroyed, the U.S. economy becomes hit very hard, and I think, as I said, there will be an economic depression. Would that create stability in the United States, or would that create instability in the United States? So I don't buy that argument.
Yeah, in the long term, instability also leads to perhaps the exact outcome that is transpiring right now, which is that eventually resistance does happen. And now Iran is representing the highest expression of that. And it's not going well in many respects there, including, this breaking news, I guess we could call it that. Barak Ravid, as I call him, our favorite Unit 8200 Mossad reporter for Axios, says that Trump tells him that he is going full Gen Z and is now low-keying it on Iran, signaling he's prepared to allow economic pressure on Iran to mount. President Rondi, can you translate that? What does that even mean, to let economic pressure on? Does that mean that the United States is just going to keep the blockade and sanctions and all of that, in perpetuity? And how would Iran respond to that?
The Strait of Hormuz will remain closed. And yes, I think that's what he is saying. That he has no other. That this is the path that he won't attack Iran, but he'll just maintain the siege, which is of course an act of war. It's directed at ordinary Iranians to starve them. Remember, during the first siege that lasted over 2 months, you saw American senators come on TV saying Iranians are hungry. They were taking such pleasure in the notion that the Iranians had no food. I mean, this is the sickness of the Epstein class. But that failed. The United States ultimately they signed the MOU, and it's really interesting, Danny. Really interesting. Have you heard any media outlet? Maybe they are saying that, but I have not read anything in the New York Times or Washington Post, any other media outlet, or any American think say that the United States should go back to the MOU. I mean, it's a deal that was signed by Trump. It was a deal that the United States committed itself to, and it began to violate it from day one. They refused to tell the Israelis to leave. They refused to hand over Iran's stolen assets. They refused to lift the sanctions on Iran's oil exports. They removed them and then reinstated them after just like a few days. They continued to threaten to destroy Iran, which was a violation of the deal. The United States they expanded the sanctions regime during the implementation of the MOU, a clear violation. Then they created this route in the Strait of Hormuz, this corridor, that was a violation of Article 5, which led to the United States attacking Iran again. because Iran was blocking it. In collaboration with the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Qatari regime, they created this corridor, whereas in Article 5, it said that Iran has to manage the strait. What the Americans wanted to do was violate all the terms of the agreement, then undermine Iran in the Strait of Hormuz and win when they lost that on the battlefield and in siege warfare. And Iran, of course, was not going to accept that. So the Iranians kept threatening them and saying this must stop. And then ultimately, when they didn't, the Iranians struck 3 of the ships owned by these 3 countries, and the Americans restarted the war because they knew that this conspiracy had failed. But the point is that you don't see the the New York Times saying go back and implement the MOU. You don't see the Washington Post saying. You don't see pundits saying that. You don't see them saying, because none of them believe that the United States needs to abide by commitments. The United States is above the law. It can sign a piece of paper today and wage war tomorrow. It can negotiate today and secretly plan for war tomorrow. This is not just an issue of Trump. The whole political establishment of the United States is lawless. It is, they help create the law of the jungle. And that worked in Venezuela, but it didn't work with Iran.
Yeah, and I'm pulling up this New York Times article that was published today about the so-called demands by Iran, saying they complicate efforts to reopen the strait. And you already noted, Professor Radi, that these so-called list of demands are simply more maybe fleshed out, more specified parts of the memorandum of understanding. There's actually nothing that
yes. I mean,
maybe other than don't threaten us, but that is part of,
no, don't threaten us is also in the MOU.
Yeah, it's like
not to threaten Iran is in the MOU.
Right.
That is one of the articles that they violated. And when Iran spoke of Lebanon, Iran said the entire region. It didn't name Palestine. It didn't name Yemen. It didn't name
all
Iran.
fronts.
Yes, it said all fronts, exactly. So now they named them. So it's nothing new. But the problem with the New York Times and all these other media outlets is that for them, why should the United States be bound to any agreement? Why should the United States abide by its commitments? Iran is complicating things further by demanding that the United States
US
implement
signed
the
it.
MOU.
Yeah, the U.S. signed it. That's the thing. It's like it's one thing, even if you want to be as subjective and anti-Iran or whatever as the Western mainstream press, like the New York Times, will always be, as long as they're organized in the way they are to be, mouthpieces of the war machine. But the fact is that Trump signed the thing. The United States signed the thing. It was an agreement. Now, I think, of course, we both know, and a lot of the audience knows, that the United States doesn't follow papers, it doesn't follow agreements, it doesn't follow international law. Yes, that is 100% true. But nevertheless, even so, it would be 100% objective to say that the United States should probably just look at the MOU again and go back to it if it's to end this war, rather than framing it as complications now, Iran complicating efforts. So it's quite stunning. I think we're going to continue to see this dance, as we've seen with all wars. The mainstream media loves to pretend when it's partisan and convenient to oppose wars, when it's not popular to hold on to them and to defend them. But once there's any opportunity to do so, they do so, and they try to find more sophisticated ways to do that. Somebody in the audience said, Professor Randi, that they're sending love and prayers to you and me, and that they received the 2 books you recommended, Manufactured Crisis, and Going to Tehran. Excited to read them. That's from Smogs Klafani. It's very funny.
Well, I would also advise him or her to, because I couldn't hear the name properly, but to also purchase Alistair Crook's book, Resistance, the Essence of the Islamist Revolution. And if it's available, Peter Oborn's book, Dangerous Delusion. It's a small book. But these are all good books. But I'm glad that
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Geopolitical Trends, where truth matters. In 2024, Gulf states have traded with China that passed $300 billion. That's more than the Gulf trade with the United States and the European Union combined. And yet, American warships still sit in Bahrain as of today. American troops still rotate through Qatar. Saudi Arabia still has a strategic defense agreement with Washington that goes back decades. So which is it? Is the Gulf drifting towards Beijing, or is it staying anchored to Washington? I've spent years working regional security issues out of Washington, watching exactly this kind of questions gets asked in a room most people will never see. And the honest answer is neither. The Gulf isn't choosing. It's running one of the most sophisticated hedges in modern geopolitics. And understanding how it works tells you more about where global power is actually heading than almost anything else in the news cycle right now. So I'm going to divide this analysis for you into 6 sections, just to make it easier for you to follow. So we'll start with section 1. And for that, I'm going to be talking about the security ledger. Why is this important? Let's start with what the United States still provide today, because this side of the ledger hasn't moved much in decades. Washington has defense cooperation agreements with Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, all 5 of which also host U.S. military bases. Saudi Arabia sits on the top of that with its own long-standing strategic defense partnership. This is the actual security architecture of the region, and no other power comes close to matching it as of today. Here is the part most coverage skips. This isn't nostalgia or inertia. It's because nobody else can currently do what Washington does here. Let's take, for example, China. China has never fought a war in the region or defending the Gulf states, and never flown an air defense mission over the region, Riyadh, Qatar, Doha, what have you, and never once put its own military credibility on the line to protect a Gulf ally from some other neighboring. And this is not criticism, it's a structural fact. And it's the whole reason the security side of this triangle looks so different from the economics. Section 2, the economic ledger. Now, this is the other side. China takes in roughly 1/3 of its crude oil from GCC countries, which makes the Gulf central to China's energy security in a way few other regions in the world are. Layer on the top of that is the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, which poured about $39 billion into the wider region in 2024 alone, more than double the year before. Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund has signed about $50 billion in deals with the Chinese companies. The United Arab Emirates has about $5 billion partnership with Chinese firms, specifically on artificial intelligence infrastructure and data centers. And here is the number that should reframe how you think about Gulf capital allocation entirely. In just the first half of this year, 2026, Gulf sovereign wealth funds deployed about $53.9 billion across 108 deals. Roughly half of that went to the US, China, and the UK, were the next largest destinations. Read that carefully. The Gulf isn't abandoning American capital markets for Chinese ones. No, it is not. It is running both simultaneously at a scale in the same fiscal year without treating either relationship as exclusive. If the truth matters to you, hit like, subscribe, and tap that bell. No spin, no agenda, just the stories they don't want you to know. Don't watch from the sideline. Be part of the movement. Your support keeps the truth alive. Thank you. Section 3. Not one Gulf, but several. Here is where I want to sort of complicate the picture for you, because most coverage treats the Gulf region as one actor with one strategy. It isn't. Oman, for example, has been the most vocal about wanting real distance from Washington. Its foreign minister published an op-ed this year calling for post-American security order that includes the Gulf monarchies, Iran, and Iraq altogether. Saudi Arabia has been quietly diversifying its security relationship too, signing a mutual defense pact with Pakistan and a defense cooperation memorandum with South Korea. On top of everything else it still has with Washington. So think about it. Compare that to Bahrain, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates, all of which have actually moved closer to the United States in the past 2 years, not further away. Of course, their argument they're facing direct Iranian pressure with no other credible protector in sight. Moving deeper into Washington's orbit reads to them as the safer option. So they think, not the outdated one. Yet, current events proved otherwise. And as I argued in my book, The Ambiguous Foreign Policy of the United States Towards the Muslim World, which I published a few years ago, and my argument still holds, is that all these dynamics suggest that the Middle East is embarking towards a new security environment, one marked by hostilities, distrust, and constant undermining. What role might the allies play in this new security environment? So the honest framing isn't the Gulf is hedging between the United States and China. The right framing is that individual Gulf states are running different versions of the same hedge, calibrated to their own specific threat exposure. That's much more useful lens for understanding this region than the single actor narrative most commentary defaults to. Section 4, the complication nobody wants to say out loud because it triggered some sort of heated arguments. This year gave us a real stress test of a whole arrangements, and it exposed something important. When the United States and Israel attacked Iran. That put pressure on the Gulf energy infrastructure and the shipping routes. Gulf states looked to China for backing. What they got instead was trade, not protection. Beijing wants the oil, the ports, the artificial intelligence partnerships. It has shown no appetite whatsoever for taking on the security responsibilities that would come with really actual, because it will actually replace Washington in this region. Beijing has no interest into that. And that's the load bearing inside of this whole topic. The hedge isn't unstable because Gulf states are indecisive. No, it's stable precisely because the two relationships aren't interchangeable. China offers economic depth without security responsibility. The United States, on the other hand, offers security guarantees on the paper that no other power will currently match or even wants to. As long as that asymmetry holds, and I see no evidence it's sort of closing anytime soon, the triangle isn't a phase the Gulf is passing through. No, it's the actual equilibrium. Section 5, the AI wild card. Now, there is one place where this balance is getting genuinely harder to hold. And it's worth flagging because it is moving very fast. Washington's own U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission has flagged AI partnership between the Chinese companies and the Gulf firms as, in its own word, a new vector of vulnerability. Export controls on the advanced semiconductors, first tightened back in 2023, as you remember, were aimed directly at closing off Chinese access through exactly these Gulf partnerships. So the problem for Saudi Arabia, for example, and the United Arab Emirates is that the advanced chip they need to become genuinely data centers hub, if ever, still come almost entirely from the American side and its allied firms. So both countries are visibly creating now a distance from China, meaning United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, on the chip and the infrastructure side, specifically to preserve access to the technology only Washington's ecosystem can currently provide, while keeping the Chinese capital and the algorithmic partnership running everywhere else. So the way you look at this is the triangle trade playing out in real time, sector by sector, and the AI is the sector most likely to force a real choice first. Section 6, why this matters beyond the headlines. Why it's in it for you. What do you need to know? Zoom out for a second, and this triangle is a preview of how middle powers are going to operate across the next decade, not just in the Gulf, by the way. Extract security from one great power, capital and infrastructure from another, former alignment with neither. That's not indecision. It's genuinely rational strategy for any state sophisticated enough to run it. And the Gulf states is running it better than almost anyone. For organizations, investment companies, AI firms trying to operate in or around this region, the practical implication is direct. Reading only the security relationship or only the economic one will consistently miss where the real risk and the real opportunity actually sits. You have and you must read both ledgers at once, and you have and must read them country by country, not as a region wide. Here is my conclusion for you, because I want to keep this short and to the point. That kind of a dual reading, holding the security picture and the economic picture in view simultaneously, country by country, rather than a region wide, is exactly the lens I bring to advisory and speaking work outside this channel. And of course, I draw on the years I spent framing exactly these kind of questions for US officials directly. So if that's useful to your organization, there's more detail in the description.
Cool. Follow me.